Hey, Admiral, I was just reading a announcement here by CENTCOM. CENTCOM says Iranian ports are basically locked down. 10,000 troops, warships, aircrafts are involved, and not a single ship has gotten through. 6 were turned back. That just came out now by CENTCOM. Let's start there. It's been a while we haven't spoken, Admiral. What do you make of the blockade and where the negotiations are at now? And also, what do you make of the ceasefire? Because we haven't spoken since the ceasefire. We spoke when the war was raging. What was your reaction of the rhetoric before the ceasefire? A lot of people were up in arms when Trump was saying what he was saying. I was less worried. I thought it was just his pressure during negotiations. So what's your general reaction?
Yeah, definitely he was posturing. He's just got to be careful. There's some very specific language that sounds like, the kind of bombing we don't do. We're very careful. The United States, as are almost all our allies, are very careful to not indiscriminately bomb civilian targets. We do hit civilian targets when it's appropriate. When a civilian target is powering an air base or a radar that's critical, we will hit a civilian power grid. But we do very careful assessment of it. And so, in bridges are often have a strong military value. So you do hit bridges. Just the president made it sound so sweepingly comprehensive that everything was in play and not helpful. Having said that, that was about posturing. He was trying to drive the Iranians to a condition that he did not get them to, judging by the 21 hours of meetings with Vance. We've tried, basically, cost imposition, deterrence by punishment, trying to deter them from striking out at their Arab neighbors and at Israel by punishing them with 15,000 strikes, and that did not work so far. We've also tried punishment by deterrence, where we knock back their ability to impact us, and I think we're getting close, by the way, to being able to convoy. The fact that U.S. Navy ships are going back and forth in the straits, we've got minesweeper, we've got mine location unmanned vehicles in the straits, tells me that we're comfortable, that we've knocked down the threat of drones, missiles, and small attack craft to a degree that with overhead aircraft, with A-10s along the waterline, armed helos, and the destroyers themselves, we're feeling pretty comfortable with the ships in there. That does not mean, by the way, that merchant ships are comfortable, and that gets to the blockade. So what's happened is Iran, coming out of this, violated maritime law. They said, we're not going to allow transit passage through an international waterway. That would allow the 200 plus ships in the Gulf of the Arabian Gulf to leave. But they've said, no, you can't leave if you're from certain countries. You can't leave if you're from other countries and won't pay a toll. And you can only leave freely, for sure, if you're an Iranian ship leaving an Iranian port with Iranian, shadow fleet fuel on it. And the United States said, that's bull, right? We're not going to allow that. You're violating international law. These ships are complicit in it. Any ship that pays a toll is complicit in the violation. Any ship that operates separately from Iranian ports is complicit in this Iranian violation. And so we said, we're going to block that. If you're going to make this hard for Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, and all their customers, then we're going to make it hard for you. And that's what you saw happen today.
I've got a lot of questions. I'm going to go back to a statement you made about rules of engagement. We're talking about Trump's rhetoric. Now, I agree. The posturing, for me, as soon as I've said this many times, as soon as he started saying those things, making those threats, I knew he's going to off-ramp. He's not going to deliver on these threats. It was pretty clear. And the only purpose to make such threats when he's trying to initially win the hearts and minds of Iranians is to get Iran to concede. And obviously, a ceasefire happened earlier than I expected, but it happened. So, yeah, I'm not too worried about this. I have a little question on this. It's away from the topic, but the rules of engagement on the U.S. side versus Israel, how different is it?
Look, I don't think it's that different. Look, they're not the exact same, because we've, Israel's been involved in in urban combat for the last 2.5 years, evolving their planning tools, their targeting tools. So they're slightly different. But I don't think the principles are the same. When I do war games with Israeli generals and their JAG, their lawyers and our targeteers, they were generally the same. We come from a principle of not intentionally doing harm to civilians. So I think they're reasonably close. Do I think the exact way that we implement facial recognition into targeting is the same? No. Do I think that the exact way that Claude works in Maven inside our planning cycle is the same as theirs? No, because they don't use the same systems. But I think they're close enough for me to comfortably say neither one of us intentionally targets civilians. Neither one of us intentionally takes away a public health and safety good without a belief that there was a military tie to it. I would say over time, the Israelis have become more aggressive. They've been so burned by the use of hospitals by their adversaries as underground command and control bunkers that the speed with which they make a determination that a hospital is a legitimate target, or when I say hospital, I mean the entrances to the hospital, not the hospital itself. They tend to hit the tunneling going into the hospital. But I understand where that delta in our approach comes from, but there probably is small deltas there.
Yeah, the deltas, I spoke to former CIA members that say, Mario, the tolerance of Mossad, or the extreme that Mossad would go to achieve a certain objective relative to the CIA, is pretty significant, because Israel's got that mindset because they're surrounded by enemies that face an existential threat, at least early on, less so now. So they've got very different tolerance to collateral damage, at least from an intelligence perspective. And I was wondering what your perception is from a military perspective.
So that's exactly it. I would say our military ones are closer and tighter. The intelligence ones are the final barrier to the existential threat, right? The military is not the final barrier. The intelligence, the offensive intelligence, the militarized intelligence forces are the final barrier. They're the ones, when you decide you're going to break into Pickaxe Mountain, they're the ones that are likely going to do it. When you decide you're going to put somebody plausibly deniable behind enemy lines, which is not, they're not boots on the ground. When we use those CIA forces or those other Israeli forces from the intelligence community, they're not boots on the ground because they don't exist. So you are willing to take different risks with them. And therefore, the delta between how we each treat those is different. And the existential nature of the threat to how Israel views the Iranian nuclear program and its associated missiles delivery systems is a much more existential threat to Israel than it is to the United States, because they don't have the delivery system to get to the United States.
Okay. Let's go to the discussion now about the blockade. So let me go back to the points I took while we're speaking. So you talked about the 15,000 strikes and degrading their capabilities of being able to strike the U.S. Navy. And the U.S. Navy, you talked about the U.S. Navy ships going through the Strait of Hormuz. First, the ships are there. Now, there's conflicting reports on whether the ships that passed a couple of days ago, I think 3 days ago, Iran says they were turned around. The U.S. says no. I'm not sure if you got which one, who you think is saying the truth. And more importantly, do you think Iran is intentionally not striking those ships because negotiations are ongoing rather than capabilities?
So first of all, I trust the U.S. reporting on this. What they were doing, I'm not sure the U.S. would tell us, that if they were doing mine sweeping or mine clearance operations, they might not tell us. They might tell us the mission, but they'll acknowledge the existence of the ships because they were seen by, observers, in other in merchant ships and things like that, and in dhows and in other smaller vessels. Look, I don't think the Iranians turned them around. I think they were doing a mission. The Iranians probably mistook, like, we're going in here to investigate this, then we're going to go here, then we go here, is them somehow turning around. Or the Iranians are just full of it. Look, why are the Iranians not striking it? One, I think for the Iranians to strike it, they would have to be able to get together from that range. That's a pretty far range. That's like 20 miles plus how far deep you are into Iran when you launch, 25, 30 miles. The only way you're going to have a successful strike is if you can get a critical mass of drones and missiles out on the same bearing at about the exact same time. And for you to do that, you have to expose yourself to our overhead imagery and to the associated strike aircraft right there. So, my gut reaction is they don't feel they can do that fast enough in the necessary timing to get a strike off, or they're limiting themselves because of the negotiations. Probably it's both. They can't do it. And by the way, it's not a smart move because of the negotiations.
Why do you think they can't do it? I know you've just explained it briefly, but wouldn't it they've been able to fire missiles across the entire region and drones nonstop on a daily basis.
So they've been able to fire missiles in like a sporadic belch of around 180 degrees, 400 miles deep, right? That's much easier than I'm going to fire a set of missiles directly at this latitude, longitude. By the way, the ships are moving, this maneuvering target, to get to it. So you have to have an active targeting program going, communicating that to a number of launch points. These are all things that we can intercept. I mean, we and the Israelis, particularly the Israelis, are world class at hey, Asaf just talked to Muhammad, and it was at this lat long and this lat long, and they passed what appeared to be targeted at, 2 weapons away, right? I mean, in other words, getting your act together to do this is an inherently risky event. Getting it together to fire 20 or 30 Shaheds from separate launch points is an extremely risky event.
So it's the communication side, the command and control side is where it's been degraded mainly.
Remember, when they fire into a lat long and somewhere in UAE, latitude, longitude, they can just let the weapon go anytime they want. It'll fly out there to the latitude, longitude. It doesn't need any targeting help. It's just going. And one of the reasons they would get through was they were shooting across a wide fan of several hundred miles. And it was very hard for the aircraft to run them down and shoot them down with rockets.
But then why not open up? We'll get to the blockade that's happening right now, but then why not open up the Strait of Hormuz? Remember, we discussed it back then. Why not do that? Why? Because the issue right now, the reason we're blockading Iran is because they're blockading the Strait of Hormuz. So we're kind of responding by blockading it. Why not open up the strait instead, even during the war, before the ceasefire?
I think the United States thinks they're close to being able to do that, but us thinking we're close to being able to do it, and merchant ships, and more importantly, their ship owners and insurers thinking that condition exists, are two different things, right? In other words, we can say that the military risk is reduced enough, it's okay to go. But there's no guarantee that the ship owners and the insurers are going to go along with that. And if they don't go along with it, it's all for naught. So, but I do think we're getting close to being able to do that. I think we were close at the end of the strikes. I think the last thing I said was I thought we were 5 to 7 days away from being able to do those kind of convoy operations. The problem is we stopped.
Okay, so let's look at the blockade now. The other strategy is blockading Iran, but that just sounds. If we have the capabilities to be able to unblock Iran's blockade, I think the strategy we're using now is a lot riskier because the global economy depends on the strait. And now we've got 2 countries blocking the straits, blocking each other's access to the straits. So that's going to be a pretty big problem for the global economy. It cannot sustain this for much longer. I feel like the US is going to be first to blink.
It's certainly economically riskier. Militarily, it's not. This is a pretty easy, not easy. Nothing's easy. This is a routine, repeatable military event. We're not going to board these ships. When we decide to board them, I don't think we're going to board them within 20 miles of Iran. We're going to let it come out and then grab it when it's well clear of the straits. I mean, let's say you're going to India. That's a week sail. You're going to Indonesia. That's a 2-week sail. You're going to China. That's a 3-week sail. We have all the time in the world to board you, find you not in compliance, and seize you and send you to a port.
But okay, so let's talk about the practicality of it. From a military perspective, everyone I spoke to agreed with you. Obviously, probably the biggest expert I've spoken to so far on this matter. But from a geopolitical perspective, from a political perspective, does it work? Like, you're going to board a ship heading to Pakistan or India that need that oil, or China, that's the second biggest military in the world?
Well, here's the good news. I mean, good news, bad news. The whole world sucks at sustained maritime presence. It turns out the navies are the hardest things to maintain, right? So when you're underperforming in your defense budgets, like Pakistan and India do, like the Europeans do, they actually can't generate maritime forces. The Brits, the French, they almost can bring nothing down to bear. The United States is one of the few navies in the world that can get 45 destroyers up and running and underway within a few days. And we have nearly half of those forces in the Middle East right now. We could bring more in. if we needed to. Very few navies can do that. That when the Chinese come, it's very limited. 2-3 ships with one oiler. I mean, they would have a lot of trouble husbanding through 15 or 20 merchant ships. If we tried again, I'm not sure what we're going to do.
That's militarily. I mean, putting China aside, that's militarily. I'm talking about politically. Can we really harm these economies of our allies to that extent?
No.
You know, Pakistan's already got people working from home, schools people learning from home. India's also struggling less so because they've got Russian oil.
I agree with you completely in the sense that who's going to break first here? Iran losing $13 billion a month in oil revenue, or everyone else in the Gulf losing most of their oil revenue, or the customers, really beginning to feel it. All the strategic reserves are playing out in April and May. The releases from strategic reserves of LNG and oil are playing out. And now you're getting real, actual loss of, there'll be a reduction in actual demand. And industrial capacity will come offline. The first thing that'll come offline, like you said, is you'll go to online and take office space offline. But very quickly, you'll be into industrial space. And that's going to be a big deal. So you're right. Which one brings now the question is, which one of those brings political pressure on Trump?
And does he really care? He's not running again. So maybe he's happy to take the political pressure so he could have a legacy making win.
We'll see. I have to tell you, I think he has to do more than just the blockade. I think he's going to have to begin to chip away at the nuclear program. He and the Israelis go hit Pickaxe Mountain, hit Isfahan again, hit other places, and say, look, we're going to just continue to rubbleize your nuclear program so that it doesn't really matter what you say.
But they've already agreed to pause their nuclear program for 5 years. I think the US is asking for 10 or 20 years. I think 20 years. I wouldn't be surprised they'll eventually meet in the middle. It's just a matter of when and where that middle is. It's not like one is saying no, one's saying yes. It's that two extremes. This one is 5, maybe 7 years. Eventually they agree to 10. Trump will keep pushing for 15 instead. So I just think that's an easy point to negotiate. I don't know what else is on the table. Fox News, the Bill Hammer from Fox News said, I just got off the phone with the senior Trump administration. Quote, a lot is happening today and tomorrow. We have all the ingredients of a deal, but it's not all there yet. The blockade has Iran really fearful, which chokes off their economy. So that's, and Iran, I know a lot of people are talking about the global economy, and I agree, I've mentioned it as well, but Iran's also can't take that forever, can't take that punishment forever. Iran is losing $400 million a day, as you said, $13 billion a month. That's a lot of money for a country that needs the money right now.
Yeah, and it has almost no other. I mean, the other thing that we're not mentioning is we and the Israelis have really done a number on their defense industrial base. And some of their defense industrial base is dual use, regular industrial base, right? You know what I mean? So their economic productivity is going to be way down whenever this ceasefire goes into effect. They're going to desperately need fuel money, and they're losing it right now, not gaining it. So I think you're right about that. One of the things that we got to remember that I don't know, I don't think their word's worth anything. So the devil in the details is how you make sure 10 years or 5 years or 15 years, whatever it is in play. Because if you're Netanyahu, and not just Netanyahu, but Israeli national security leadership, you have to understand, you have to have an actual belief that this is a legitimate deal. Because it's hard for Israel to mow the grass, so to speak, in Iran on their own. It's not impossible, but it's hard. And there are future leaders in the US that may not be as accommodating. So they've got to really make sure this is a good deal. So to me, that challenges me. And if I could mention one of the things that pisses me off, we don't talk about who this regime is. This is a regime that just prior to the strikes killed somewhere between, I think, 25,000 and 30,000 people in a 40-hour period. I mean, these are not, someone told me the other day, they're a resilient, social structure. I'm like, that's not resilience. That's a baked in fear, right? That the resilience in Iran is based on your fear that the IRGC holds you accountable next.
Mm.
So I'm a little worried that we're kind of ignoring this part of the IRGC, and it's going to be in full when this ceasefire is in place. You know, they're going to be out there, you know, hammering the opposition hard.
Yeah, I agree on that point. And I did a tweet about it a few days ago. I'm like, let's not like this war, and I consider this a stupid war because it just upsets me so much. I find it unnecessary. Obviously, people disagree with me, but I'm like, this war kind of brought attention away from the Iranian regime, and in the eyes of many now, many that might have been critical in January, in the eyes of many, they see them as resistance against the American empire, etc. You know, the heroes welcome in Pakistan. That wouldn't have happened in January, even if Pakistan likes the regime. Would have been very limited. You know, if they went, they would have been more hush hush. A visit now is like a visit on national TV for the entire country and the world to see. So yes, I think that war has had a lot of consequences that I'm not happy with. Going back to the blockade. So what if China decides to escort one of their ships militarily? I know Trump will have to make the decision on whether to intercept that ship, but yeah,
I think you call him and make a deal. You don't escort it, I'll lose sight of it. You know what I mean? There's a way out of it. There's a way Trump can de-escalate this. Don't make this about the U.S. and China. That lets Iran off the hook.
Couldn't Trump? Saying he didn't see it, letting it escape, that would be a bad look for the U.S. military. Wouldn't it be like, hey, we did a deal with China, we made an exception? That's a better look, no?
Yeah. However, you know, I don't think Trump. Yeah, Trump likes making deals, so he'd take credit for it.
Exactly.
Making the military look stupid doesn't bother him. I mean, he doesn't want to do that, but I don't think he loses sleep at night that the U.S. Navy doesn't look brilliant. But look, what he really needs is this to end, and anything to get China towards a quicker end is better. And in other words, keeping China so they don't extend this, and China doesn't want to extend it either.
Do you think there's mines right now on the straits and the Omani side? And are they just lost floating around? And what are America's capabilities in removing those mines?
I think so there's multiple questions in there. Do I think there are mines? I'm suspecting there are. Just the way we're using those two destroyers with the with some unmanned surface vessels lets me think that something's going on there, that we're looking for mines. We probably know where they think they set them. And that the problem is we know where the Iranians, we hear the Iranians talk, oh, I said it here, I said it there. And the Iranians didn't really know where they set. I mean, at no point do I think the Iranians were like, someone check the Hague Convention, make sure we're doing this right. You know what I mean? You know, I think they just kind of dropped a minefield and, you know, some number of mines, probably around a dozen. And now we've got to go pick them out. They may know where a few are. That'll make it easier because we'll know where they think they were and try to get them out. But it's going to take a little bit of time.
What are China's naval capabilities versus the US? You know, everyone's excited about how fast they're growing, how many ships they're building. I think they've got their first nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, the only other country to have one now, other than the US. The US has a few. What can you tell us about the kind of putting the noise, looking inside through all the noise? How capable are they now?
So, look, they've become the second. I think they passed Japan and are the second best Navy in the world. You know, they have more ships than the United States, but numbers of ships isn't the measure of the Navy. I mean, I would take number of Virginia class and Los Angeles class submarines. That's a more important number. And the United States obviously has a lot more, you know, has infinitely more of those, or 50 plus more of those. So it's the type of ships they have that it would not be a straight up fight between the two navies. But that's not how you fight. You fight with navies and air forces and other things. Plus, the Chinese aren't going to come out into the open ocean and see how it goes. They've built a navy to try to do cross-strait invasions and operate inside the first island chain, win inside the first island chain. Their ships can come out and operate in the Indian Ocean, but I think they'd be at a severe disadvantage. And they do, but I think they'd be at a disadvantage versus the U.S. Navy. That doesn't mean I take them lightly. You know, they can easily sink a U.S. Navy ship. They have high-quality missiles and competent mariners. But I just think, you know, overall, I don't lose sleep at night about a Navy on Navy contest. I lose sleep at night if the U.S. Navy had to penetrate the first island chain and fight an away game against the Chinese up close, against the whole Chinese military up close.
So on the nuclear attack submarines, there is a big discrepancy there. I was looking at the numbers now. The US has 50 of them, 20 of them are Virginia class. China's only got 6 to 8 nuclear submarines. So there's a big discrepancy there. When it comes to their latest aircraft carrier, I remember that came out. We posted about it. Have you looked into it? Their nuclear powered one?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm a nuclear officer, operator from
Oh,
our
nice.
Navy,
Okay.
and I commanded a carrier strike group, so I have a pretty good
Oh,
sight line.
beautiful. Then I'm actually really fascinated. I think the audience will
Yeah,
enjoy it as well. What is, maybe first for the audience, briefly, for the ones that don't know, what is a nuclear powered? So it's very different to a nuclear arm. Doesn't mean an
yeah.
aircraft carrier has a nuclear missile in there. So what does it mean, and why is that important, and how does it compare to China's?
So a nuclear-powered warship has 1 or 2 nuclear reactors. If it's a submarine, it has a smaller one. If it's an aircraft carrier, it has 1 to 2 larger ones. We had a carrier called the Enterprise that had 8 nuclear reactors on it. They were smaller ones. That's out of service now. But we have, these submarines with, large nuclear reactors. They're pressurized water reactors. They provide power to the ship, power to the catapults, on the latest ships, power to the catapults because they're electronic, power to the weapon systems. And they also drive the ship at really high speeds. Our aircraft carriers go faster than our regular ships. I mean, they're just fast. And we brag on that routinely. Now, look, what they do is the aircraft carrier has a flight deck that's, about 10 U.S. football fields, 3 U.S. football fields long. And we operate anywhere from 60 to 80 aircraft on that flight deck, which is amazing. In an area you might operate 1 or 2 737s, we operate 70 aircraft, and we organize them and fold their wings up, fold their wings down, load them, fuel them, launch them, and we can do sustained flight operations for 10, 12, 14 hours a day for many days on end. And it means you have a lot of combat power. And the beauty is it moves, right? The aircraft carrier moves. It's harder to target than an air base. We saw what happened to air bases and the radars around
Yeah.
air bases.
How fast? How fast do they move? The American ones, the French one, the Charles de Gaulle is a bit similar as well, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think we advertise. We use an unclassified number that's in the 30 miles an hour range, but usually things go faster than their unclassified numbers. I mean, the beauty is it goes fast enough that even in a very still wind day, it can create enough wind across the flight deck, because that's what you're gonna do, is create wind across the flight deck so you can launch your planes and recover your planes more easily. And so the carrier has to have a lot of power to be able to speed up and slow down based on the winds. And it's just a very impressive sight.
It makes it harder, just on the movement side, sorry, as it makes it harder to target by the Iranians, for example, with missiles and even drones, to be able to get the
100%.
coordinates. Because by the time they have the coordinates and the command and control structures all been deteriorated, so be able to send that back to command center or whoever launches the missile or drone, the ship would have moved already.
A drone has no chance because of the speed of the drone is so slow, in the 100, 150 knots. Missiles go a lot faster. So, there are some missiles that go several times the speed of sound, 1,200, 1,800 miles an hour. Most of the anti-ship cruise missiles go about 600 miles an hour. And then the drones go like 100, 150. So the faster you can move, the more you can move, the bigger what's called circular error probability. The spot where the carrier could be based on your last location becomes hundreds of miles. So your drone seeker head never finds it, or your missile seeker head never finds it. So that's why speed matters. That's why having a non-fixed location is important. It doesn't avoid everything. The Chinese can target our aircraft carriers with their own submarines and with long-range anti-ship ballistic missiles, but we have abilities to defeat those.
So let's talk about China's Navy capabilities. And I think they've revealed their first nuclear powered aircraft carrier, correct? There's not much information about it.
Yeah, they now have, I believe, 3 aircraft carriers that operate of different variations. So you're right, they have a newest one. Right now I consider their aircraft carriers targets. Like, if they were really in a crisis with us, they'd be smart to keep them in port, because our submarines would really enjoy that opportunity. Now, and by the way, our submarines do the same thing to us. They mail us photographs of our aircraft carrier in the crosshairs kind of thing all the time, just for fun. So our submariners are very good. They would struggle against.
No one compares to the American submarine fleet.
I agree. That is what we claim. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we're going back to the point that kind of led us to this discussion. I appreciate the deep dive. So we talked about China escorting one. You said that's unlikely because the US and China don't want to see themselves in a conflict, even a political one. Yeah, look, a lot of things that wouldn't have expected to happen, including this war as a whole, are happening. And the defense ministry said, we expect others not to interfere in our affairs, talking about the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, and said Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz and has opened it to us. So it's pretty aggressive language from China. I wouldn't have expected them to say that. And they've been more vocal since the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. If this blockade continues on the American side, how far could China sustain this? And what if Trump keeps pushing it just to be able to have Iran kneel and China doesn't accept it? And there is that, I wouldn't say military confrontation, but what's the escalation ladder there?
Well, China's less vulnerable to a sustained lack of Persian Gulf fossil fuels than other Asian economies. They have a lot of stowage. They have a lot of coal usage. They have nuclear power. They have renewables. Their reliance on oil and LNG is much lower. That is lower than other Asian economies, and they have a large amount of stowage. So between those, I think they're less vulnerable. Now, when everyone's being hurt, and you're the Chinese economy that's basically dependent on exports, you're going to have a problem. If everyone has a problem, China has a problem. Yeah. So even if China's problem is not the worst, they have the worst problem because they have the economy that was most dependent on exports. And I already think their GDP is lower than they imply. I think it's in the 3% range, maybe 3 to 4% range. And so for their growth, for their economy that's supposed to be moving people from rural to urban environments, doing all kinds of things, 3 to 4% GDP growth is unacceptable. And if it's lower than that, because this extends, it's really unacceptable.
So who do you think will blink first? And what is the likelihood as well? I'm assuming that someone will blink. What is the likelihood that, both sides are rearming? Also, we didn't talk about China supplying the manpads and the HQ-9 air defense systems as well to Iran. So could we see enough appetite on both sides that we're back into a kinetic war?
I'm hoping we're tracking that stuff pretty carefully. If it's actually being distributed yet, the HQ-9.
That concerns you?
Yeah, that would concern me. That's something we have to go hit. It would concern us or the Israelis back, before the 12-day war, before the beginning of this war. Those are the kind of things you want to destroy on the first night. What that would mean is, we were hoping to not have to use any of the high-end long-range precision stuff that we used the first 3 or 4 nights that everybody was highlighting, like Tomahawks and JASSM-ERs. We'd have to break them back out to go get all the new air defense stuff. So I'm hoping it wasn't delivered. We'll see. But
are they difficult to track through the satellites? Like usually you track them at the loading stage in China, I assume, because if you miss them there, if they manage to load them, then it's going to be hard to track them the rest of the time.
I think we probably are tracking them. I'd be surprised if we weren't. So between us and the Israelis, I think both of us with overhead imagery and signals intelligence, the Israelis with signals intelligence plus human intelligence, I think we have a pretty good idea where these things are. If they're in country, if they're being mobilized, we'll hit them. If combat arms start again. I don't think combat's going to start again. I don't know. Look, if you ask me who's going to blink, I mean, Trump's winning the blinking award, right, in general over the last 15 months. But so far he didn't in this. I mean, he went 40 full days of cost imposition with a lot of criticism, international criticism, with a lot of domestic criticism. He didn't blink. He stopped when he thought he had imposed enough cost, and he just reached a point where the next bit of cost imposition was probably too much. He knew he didn't want to hit their gas fields, their Iranian gas fields, because the obvious counterstrike on that is against Saudi, UAE, and Qatar would have been very exposed. That's the proximity. Qatar and UAE, Qatar and Kuwait are just so close. There's very little you can do to defend against.
Even the UAE, no, even the UAE, the difference, just over the straits.
A little bit longer. But the UAE is also, they're tatted up. I mean, they have a lot of weapons.
You're talking air defense or beyond air defense?
Both air defense and strike.
Really?
I'm surprised that the UAE did not impose a little more pain on the.
There was the report that they sent a MiG to strike the refinery on an island, one of the Iranian islands. Did you see that report?
Yeah, I think they probably did hit Abu Musa or one of the other. There's a series of islands that they disputed claim between Iran and and
Abu Musa,
Abu
Tunub
Musa,
little and bigger Tunub. I think it was little or whatever. So, but do you think UAE? Interesting. So the UAE does have significant strike capabilities. I didn't know that.
Oh yeah. I mean, Mohammed bin Zayed's done a pretty good job building an aggressive and effective offensive and defensive systems. He's the only one. He and the Saudis bought a lot of. The Saudis weren't really tested. I think the Iranians took it easy. Easy is the wrong word. They did not focus on the Saudis. They focused on the UAE, and that's the real hatred. The UAE and Iran is real beef, and you can see that in the percentage. I want to say more than 60% of the Arab launches, the launches against the Arab neighbors, were done against UAE, and they did a very good job defending themselves. All things being equal, I'm impressed with their military, and I've always been impressed over the last 15 years with their military, and they impressed me again over these 40 days.
And now they got Zelensky there as well, not only in the UAE but other Gulf countries
fantastic.
as well.
Look, I spent a lot of time. I'm in Ukraine about 8 weeks a year working with their military, and these counter drone interceptors was such an obvious shortfall a year ago. And there's a lot of people, I was among them, saying there's a problem here. We need this. We, the United States, need this. Our allies need it. The problem when the United States doesn't do something, our allies tend to follow suit, right? If we're not buying something, they're not buying something. And we made a gigantic error there. You could see the need for these. I think there's a sense of hubris that we're going to develop our own. Those Ukrainian ones have a lot of Chinese parts in them. I don't give a damn. I'm very happy when a Ukrainian interceptor drone leaves near my head and hits a Shahed that was somewhere else near my head, right? That's a win. And I don't care if it has Chinese parts in it when it hits it. And they were, they're between 60 and 90% effective, each of these counter drones. And they're only $1,000 to $6,000.
Would have saved so much money. So much money.
It's disgraceful. And we also, the U.S. became reliant on the air delivered ones. We had these air precision kill weapon systems that are rockets that are cheap and great, but air alone isn't enough. You can't defend Bahrain, Qatar, all those really close ones from the air because your planes would have to be over Iran to do the intercepts. And early in the war, we weren't going to do that. Anyway, big missed opportunity.
What do you make of the Tomahawk stockpiles as well? Apparently, they've used up a quarter to a third of the stockpiles. It'll take them a couple of years minimum.
That's okay. And
doesn't worry you?
No, before the war, we had changed. We'd already begun, starting in last year's congressional language. They said, hey, you can do multi-years on Patriot, THAAD, Tomahawk, about 7 or 8 different systems. And the Department of Defense had already started to do multi-year deals. Like Patriot was already set to go from 600 a year to 2,000 a year, and to build a total like 7,000 over the next 5 years. Tomahawk's the same way. We're going to increase the number you can build by 4 or 5 times over the next 2 years. So we'll recover the Tomahawks pretty fast. I try not to overworry. I mean, I know there's people who sit there and get really nervous about that. That's not what makes me nervous. I think we'll get the Tomahawks back. I'm more worried about the fact that we don't have these low-cost counter-drone systems. We lost
so surprising
hundreds of millions of dollars worth of radars, maybe billions of dollars worth of radar, for want of $1,000 to $5,000 counter interceptor drone.
That must drive you mad. Yeah, I can see
it is.
That's probably the most upset I've seen you since we've started speaking.
It's because you could see it in Ukraine. I mean, this is the problem. I'll just tell you one weird thing. I'm in Taiwan right now. There are 2 places in the world where the U.S. military will not send its active duty admirals and generals. Ukraine, the war we're in, and Taiwan, the war we're going to be in. We take this very aggressive hands-off attitude to both of those places. That hands-off attitude to Ukraine cost us. It cost us men and women who were killed when their ops center was hit. It cost us a lot of equipment, and it cost us operational flexibility. It paralyzed our Arab partners, not the UAE, everyone else.
Well, there's a lot of talks as well about these Arab partners running out of munitions too. So they're not in the best place either. And there's been reports, I haven't been able to confirm this, but a lot of people were saying that the US was prioritizing Israel over the Gulf countries in terms of munition stockpiles and air defenses. Is that true?
With what? No, because here's let's think about what they have. Israel has Arrow, David Sling, and Iron Dome. None of the Arab countries have those. Israel doesn't have Patriot. And the U.S. Navy has SM-3s that we use to defend Israel. They're not useful defending the Arab states. They're built to do like an intercept of a 1,500-mile kind of intermediate range ballistic missile. Iran firing at Israel. I've heard that rumor. I just don't know what it's based on. I mean, I'd like to know what weapon system was prioritized. The only thing I can think of is THAAD, which has done okay in this. But it isn't like when an Arab state says, I need some THAAD, it gets delivered next week. They order it from FMS and it comes in like 2 years. I'm not aware of prioritization problems there. If there are some, we've kept it pretty quiet. And it's not a clear, obvious one because the air defense weapons that Israel uses are inherently Israeli or U.S. Israeli.
And have you seen the numbers on the interception rate in Israel? Does that worry you? Because the numbers apparently was 5% getting through and went up to 20-something percent, 23, 25% by the end of the war. Now, I'm not sure whether that's just the numbers because of the cluster munitions or I think the tolerance for which strikes to intercept, which was not to, like in Ukraine. The tolerance is pretty high. If something's striking a target, like even a civilian target, but one that's not strategically important, they might let it through, just they don't have enough munitions. But on the Israeli side, they had a lot more, so they were a lot stricter early on, and then slowly they've kind of loosened it up. That's what happened.
That's exactly what it is. It's conservation. It's called the principle of conservation. Yeah. You conserve your rounds. I got to tell you, Zelensky conserves them tightly because I think the Ukrainians have fired, their total number of Patriot firings equals less than the first week of the war. That's over 52, over 4 years, 52 weeks, 200 weeks. He fired less than 1 week in this. And that's because he does conservation. I mean, I see ballistic missile attacks that could be engaged if they had the batteries and the missiles, but are just ignored. And as you say, they hit civilian targets. And I don't think the Israelis let things intentionally hit civilian targets. Mm-hmm. Much like with Iron Dome, they would sometimes make a conclusion that missile does not appear headed towards a sufficiently inhabited area. And they'd let it hit. I think there was some of that. So I try again. Do I think that the numbers got worse over time? Yes. Do I think it was conservation? Yes. Do I think that they were an extremist? Not quite yet.
And do you think the cluster munitions did it work on the Iranian side? Because they left it to later in the war. Is that strategic by the Iranians? And how is it true that they're very difficult to intercept?
You got to intercept them early. Like, there's rumors that Iron Dome did a couple ballistic missile intercepts. That may or may not be true. They wouldn't be doing it on a cluster munition equipped missile because it would have dispersed. You got to hit the cluster ones before they cluster, right? You got to hit the weapon carrying the clusters early. So it probably not launching them for a while and then launching them late might have their intention might have been to lull the Israelis into a sense of you can do later intercepts when in fact, assess that missile, see if it's really going to hit something. But the combination of conservation plus cluster munitions was a bad couple nights.
It was well played by Iran. Admiral, last question is what do you expect to happen next with these negotiations and with the military buildup that we're seeing as well?
So I do think they're going to get a deal here. Trump, both countries, this is hurting, right? Like you mentioned, $40 million a day, $13 billion a month, a couple $100 billion, $300 billion a year. That's leaving a mark on the Iranian recovery. Iran recognizes they're not getting retributions, right? They're not getting reclamation payments. They're not getting anything. And in general, they're going to find out Russia and China don't help their partners out too much after they've had their butts handed to them, right? There's not going to be a big Chinese, rebuilding plan, reconstruction plan, and there certainly won't be any Russian help. So the Iranians aren't really that excited about another round of kinetic strikes. But Trump wants out too. He wants out. The way he was, you pointed it out, the way he was posturing at the end. I would say the same with Hegseth, except I think he means it. I mean, Hegseth's posturing was kind of, eye rolling, kind of crazy. But there was a lot of posturing going on.
A lot of people in the military are just not happy with Hegseth, considering his background. At the camp, is it true? Like even people within the military are just upset by it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it's true.
I can. It's nice to get an outsider. I've had one general tell me it's nice to get an outsider, but it's also first as a way of handling things, and I also empathize with it. Like when people have spent their whole life in the military and have someone come in from being a commentator on Fox and barely spent any time in the military, come in and be their boss and acting in a certain way, I can empathize with them.
It's the firings. I mean, he has fired people we know many of us who are general officers know to be competent. You don't have to like them. Some of the people he fired weren't my friends, but they're people I knew were competent. And he was firing them because of a perception of that they had been promoted because of their gender or their race, which was not true, or a perception that they had been overly committed to diversity training, which is kind of ludicrous.
Why do you think he actually fired them? Why do you think is the real reason?
That's it. I mean, he fired him for those reasons. There's no doubt. He just fired the head of the Army, Randy George, in the middle of this whole kerfuffle, because George said you should not be intervening with. We have general officer board. We selected 1-stars, and it's a very deliberative process, anonymized, very fair. And Hegseth tried to pull. He just successfully removed, allegedly, 2 women and 2 African Americans from the list of generals. And Randy George said that's wrong. He and the Secretary of the Army fought Hegseth, but Hegseth won and then fired him. That's not healthy.
He fired him, but do you think he really fired him for something so petty?
Yes. He fired the head of the Navy. He wrote in a book before he became Secretary of Defense that the head of the Navy was a female and was only picked to be head of the Navy because she was female. He'd never met her. He just assumed that from his observation of her from a long distance. Then when he gets in office, he barely says a word to her, and after a couple weeks, calls her up while she's on a trip, which is his MO, is to call you while you're traveling so that you can't have an actual face-to-face conversation, and fire you over the phone, and then tell you the plane can bring you back. But in George's case, he told him you have 4 hours to clear out of your office. The head of the Army.
Someone spent 40 years in the military. That's not nice.
That's the least of my complaints, is that it's not nice. It's really undermining.
Demoralizing as well.
Yes, demoralizing. That's exactly it. And people lose trust in the system. And this is a system that we work really hard to get promoted. You put in unbelievable hours, so you have to believe the system's not rigged.
Maybe that's where the demoralization comes from.
Exactly.
Like believing in the system is what allows you to go through all the shit in the military to get in those positions. 40 years in the military. And last question. But you don't think that's to do with Randy George? I thought would relate it to the Iran war. You don't think so?
No.
Because that's what everyone was speculating. A lot of people were. Okay.
Not that I could see.
Okay. Admiral, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time. I know it's late in Taiwan. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for having me.
Not at all. Thank you, Admiral. All right, everyone. We've got Rula Jubrail, who'll be coming on in about 3 minutes. I think she's being set up. I'm just going to check with the producers now, being set up in the background. And this is going to be less of a military discussion, more of a political discussion, right versus wrong, especially when it comes to Israeli foreign policy in the region. I'm going to be focusing on Lebanon. So to give you all an update on Lebanon, there's meetings happening, I think today. They're happening as we speak in Cyprus. Between Lebanon and Israel. That's the first time they meet, I think, since the early 1980s, before the war, since the Civil War broke out, maybe ever, between the two countries. And the goal is to discuss a ceasefire. So Lebanon wants to discuss a ceasefire. Israel does not want to discuss the ceasefire until Hezbollah is disarmed. It's a very tricky position to be in, because on one side, I empathize with Israel's position. I know I'll probably get a lot of slack for this, guys. I'm one of the most critical people when it comes to Israeli foreign policy. But I empathize with Israel's position about getting rid of Hezbollah. Hezbollah is a military wing. I think the most powerful non-state actor in the world as a military, from a military perspective. And they're in Lebanon, which barely has a military. So they essentially indirectly control Lebanon. Are they supported by a lot of Lebanese people? Yes. But the Lebanese army is supported significantly more by more factions of the by Lebanese society. So the Israeli-Lebanon talks have already begun now in Washington. They started as we speak. I thought they were happening in Cyprus. They're happening in Washington. I apologize. I'm in Cyprus. And and as we speak, by the way, both sides are bombing each other. So there's rockets being fired by Hezbollah onto Israel, and Hezbollah does not have a seat on the table in these negotiations. So that makes it very tricky. So I understand Israel wanting to disarm Hezbollah that keeps firing at Israel at the behest of Iran. I also understand the other side of it. I'm just very disturbed by Israeli foreign policy or Israeli behavior in Lebanon, in South Lebanon. The defense ministers said that everyone that lives south of the Litani that's been asked to evacuate, which is south of the Litani River, which is I think it's about 10% of Lebanon, 20% of the population. They cannot go back home even after the war ends. You guys, if you watch the show, you understand. I've talked to various guests about this, including, I'd say, pro-Israeli guests or guests that are very supportive of the Israeli military and foreign policy. Eilon Levy, Jonathan Conricus, among others, and they've agreed with me that this policy is wrong. One could say even inhumane, and they believe he's not being serious about it. It's more of a negotiating tactic against Lebanon. So this is what really gets me worried, because the people that are even critical of Hezbollah, the counter argument they make is Hezbollah is the deterrent for Israel not annexing Lebanese territory in the whole Greater Israel project. That's something I'll be talking with Rula about in a few minutes when she comes on. So that's the other side of the argument, which I'm leaning more to that. I'm in the middle, actually, now. I'm very critical of Israeli policy, but I also think Hezbollah needs to go for Lebanon to do well. But then what's the deterrent against Israeli aggression? So there needs to be a lot more support, maybe merging Hezbollah within the Lebanese military, because right now what Israel is asking for is the destruction of the military capabilities of Hezbollah. But there also needs to be some support. Countries like France, the US, etc., need to arm the Lebanese military. There's been promises made to ensure deterrent is there beyond the international law against Israel, remaining in Lebanese territory. Because remember, after the invasion in the 70s and 80s, in 80s till 2000, I think it is, in that 18-year invasion of Lebanon, Israel stayed there 18 years. So they invaded Lebanon to get rid of the PLO and then fight Hezbollah, and they ended up staying there for 18 years until Hezbollah kicked them out of the country. And since then, Hezbollah has been seen as a deterrent. So that's going to be something I'm going to bring up with Rula, get her thoughts on. And I'll give you guys an update just on the negotiations, some of the latest developments today as we wait for Rula to join. So number one, there's been talks about the damages that Iran has faced from the war. New York Times estimated it was $800 billion to $1 trillion. Well, according to Iranian media, according to Tasnim, Iran puts the damage bill from the US and Israeli strikes at $270 billion. Per a government spokesman, Fatemeh. So the government spokesperson said it's $250 billion. That's a massive number. I don't know where they're going to get their money from. But if they have a toll booth at the Strait of Hormuz for, let's say, a year, and if they unfreeze some of their money and lift the sanctions, they could probably get that money within 6 months' time if the US accepts. Now, they have to dismantle their nuclear program for a very long time in order for that to happen. But there is a path in order to make up for that money, for that lost money, that $250 billion. So that's what the spokesperson has said. That includes so other points on the matter. Reparations were raised during the talks in Pakistan. So Iran is looking in those negotiations though to enrich uranium and lift all sanctions. And they're saying that we want $270 billion paid on top of the sanctions lifted and to continue enriching uranium. Obviously, that's a starting position. They've already conceded on some of these behind the scenes. The US position is on paper is okay, no nukes, and that's non-negotiable. So, and now Trump is putting pressure on the Iranian economy by, oil exports are about 50% of the government's revenue, of the Iranian government's revenue, and Trump is closing that up through a blockade. So it's going to make it harder for Iran to get the money to keep the wheels turning in the country with the blockade happening and with them facing that significant damages. Now, they're also demanding part of the compensation, the reparations, not only to be paid by the US, they're asking the Gulf, Saudi, Qatar, Bahrain, the UAE, and Jordan. They didn't mention Oman. Obviously, they've got a good relationship with Oman, to pay the Qatar is there, surprising, to pay the to play a part in paying the reparations. In a letter to the UN Security Council, Iran accused these nations of helping the US and Israel attack Iran. Now, we know there's been attacks from Kuwait. I think the airspace of these countries has opened as well for the strikes. Will these countries accept to pay reparations? Unlikely, highly unlikely. But reparations could be structured in different ways to be made like a business deal in some way, and that's what Trump could do. I think. Let me see. I got an update from the producers. So Rula's here already, guys. So we'll be bringing her up now. I'll give you a quick few updates before Rula comes up. So the whole discussion has been about China. That's something I've been bringing up in my interviews. Xi Jinping held back-to-back meetings in Beijing today, putting forward a 4-point peace proposal for Iran. Just a lame proposal: peaceful coexistence, national sovereignty, international rule of law, coordination of development and security. These are the statements I would have expected from the US before this administration. Now, Iran's economy is getting hammered hard, $400 million a day, as the Admiral talked about earlier. But China's economy can't sustain this for much longer. China needs Iranian oil. They've got a lot of reserves. There's the floating reserves on the Iranian side, but also they've got a lot of stockpiles within Chinese reserves. I think the most in the world. They've got more reserves on many things, including oil in China. And that puts them in a good position to sustain this for a while, but it has its limits. Now, there's also another development that happened today. Pete Hegseth did a deal with Indonesia. You know that we're talking about the Strait of Hormuz. There's a Strait of Malacca, and Indonesia has its border on it has the Strait of Malacca on their coast. So there's a defense pact that was just signed between the US and Indonesia. And just remember, we're talking about a big chunk of Iran's oil going through the Strait of Hormuz. Well, 80% of their oil imports go through the Strait of Malacca. Now, most of it comes from the Strait of Hormuz and then through the Strait of Malacca. But that gives a lot of leverage of American leverage over that strait. So one could argue that from a strategic perspective, the US is everything we're seeing from Venezuela to Iran and now this defense pact is all about controlling the world's flow of oil. It gives a lot of leverage by the US against any country, in this case, China, by controlling Venezuela, which was supplying a big chunk of oil to China. Now controlling the Strait of Hormuz, and now we're talking about Indonesia and having influence and never have control, influence over the Strait of Malacca. China will be looking at this pretty nervously because that, from a strategic perspective, that would make sense. That would make this war make a bit more sense. It doesn't make it okay. So that's another development. And Rula will be up any second. So Benny Johnson did a video. He made a good point. Did Trump just pull off the biggest power move in modern history? That's exactly what I was talking about. With Venezuela's oil under U.S. control and the Strait of Hormuz blockaded, some are arguing America now effectively oversees the global oil supply. It's a very fair argument. I've made the argument from the beginning that the goal was the control of the Strait of Hormuz. It wasn't the nuclear program, obviously. It wasn't supporting the Iranian protesters, and it was not because Israel asked Trump to get into this war. Lastly, the Gulf, Saudis telling, and the Admiral was just talking about this, Saudis telling Trump to back off the blockade before Iran shuts down the only route keeping the Gulf oil flowing, and that's the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. So we've talked about this on the show before. The most powerful card that Iran has left that they haven't played yet is using the Houthis, working with the Houthis to close the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, the alternative that Saudi is using right now to export oil. And the Houthis, there's a deal done behind the scenes. Ian Bremmer mentioned it. I'd say he broke the story, and he mentioned it on my show when he came on a few weeks ago. And I think based on that report, according to a source from the royal family, Saudi did a deal with the Houthis to make sure that they don't shut down the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. But that deal can only go so far, because if Iran pressures Houthis to shut it down, they would. So Saudi's worried about that. The Houthis could also strike the pipelines that go from the oil refineries all the way to the port that exports out of the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, and those oil refineries have been struck and have been struck before and can be struck by the Houthis. Just takes a few drones on that vast territory. So that is something that Saudi is worried about. Lastly, on Lebanon, a Lebanese official outlines Beirut position ahead of today's direct talks. What Lebanon is looking for in these negotiations is very different to what Israel is looking for. Priority is a ceasefire, nothing else. That's the Lebanese priority. Number 2, Lebanese ambassador's mandate is strictly limited to discussing a ceasefire. Okay, so again, ceasefire is the only thing. Today's session is preliminary, a starting point only. All other issues will require the full 3-party delegations. Does that include Hezbollah, or does that include Israel and the US? Rubio's presence is seen as a serious signal of US commitment. So Rubio's leading those negotiations between Israel and Lebanon. Contacts with Washington described as positive. So far, that doesn't mean anything. So that's the negotiations that are going on. Bring her up. I think Rula's, but I think be ready. Told the producers to bring her up as soon as she's ready. As soon as ready. All right. So these are the negotiations that are ongoing right now in Washington. Israel's on a very, very different page. Israel's conditions for Lebanon have been leaked. Let's see who leaked them. It doesn't say. I'm guessing some Israeli media outlet. Diplomatic sources told Al Modon, I'm guessing it's an Arab one, that Israel wants Lebanon divided into 3 zones. Sound familiar, everyone? That language is what gets people scared. Zone 1, an 8-kilometer buffer strip in the south. Permanent, no return of displaced civilians. Zone 2, everything south of the Litani becomes a military operations area when Israel dismantles Hezbollah's infrastructure and disarms it completely. Israeli forces leave only when they decide they're finished. Or at least they're not talking about people not being able to return home in that zone. But they haven't mentioned that they can either. Zone 3, north of the Litani and all of remaining Lebanon, the Lebanese army must fully disarm Hezbollah and dismantle Hezbollah on its own. So essentially, they're separating this into 3 stages. And that's, I've discussed this before on the show as well. There's that small territory on the border with Israel. And what Israel's already done there is they've destroyed a lot of the homes there. And Jonathan Conrick is his position, which I disagree with. No one there should be able to return home. That should be a buffer zone for Israel. Lebanese territory, but a buffer zone that Israel will have control over. Second, there'll be a bigger buffer zone, but not a buffer zone. But there'll be a bigger territory from the 8-kilometer region to the Litani River, and that's a much bigger region, which is about 10% of Lebanon. That one will continue being an operation where Israel will continue dismantling Hezbollah capabilities. And continue their operations. Again, they did not talk about this becoming a buffer zone. That's really important. And zone 3 is the rest of Lebanon where Hezbollah needs to be dismantled. In other words, in the majority of Lebanon, the Lebanese army needs to get rid of Hezbollah militarily. South of the Litani, the Israeli military is going to do it. And then that last 8 kilometers, the last bit will be a buffer zone. Seems like a permanent buffer zone in case, maybe that will be rediscussed if Hezbollah is disarmed successfully. So that is where Israel's at. They want to include all these in the negotiations. Now, whether Lebanon will accept this, these negotiations are meant to lead to a ceasefire. So I'm not sure what terms that the Israelis will accept in order to reach a ceasefire. All right, so Rula's ready. They're just having a bit of a technical issue bringing her up on the studio. So I told them to bring her up as soon as she's ready. But this is a bit of an update here on the developments, and I'll go back to the blockade that's happening. Some updates as well going through from the morning. The Chinese Defense Ministry has given a warning. In that warning, they said their ships need to go through the Strait of Hormuz. They need to do business with Iran. Also, they said Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz and has opened it up to us. When they said Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz, that was pretty specific language, and I'm not sure what they mean. Whether they mean that Iran should be allowed to control it and charge a toll at the Straits. And if that is China's position, that would be really concerning, because that means China stepping up more to trying to deter America's influence and what America wants in the region. And if you add that with the fact that China is supplying Iran with the HQ-9A defense systems, allegedly, because that is very significant, as the Admiral just said, but also the man pads, which we know they're being supplied in large quantities, that would give Iran more capabilities to be able to shoot down American and Israeli fighter jets. So that is where Iran's position is at. The negotiations on the Iran conflict are happening now as we speak again. The round 1 finished and ended negatively. That was what they were saying. Perfect. Rula's coming up now. She's ready. Bring her up, Lisa. Whenever she's ready, just bring her up immediately. I want to read a comment here because I'll probably mention that to Rula. The Israeli energy minister said the following: if the Lebanese government does not dismantle Hezbollah, then it is time to target Lebanon's infrastructure. And it's statements like this that really make me question Israeli intentions. Rula, A lot has happened since we spoke. Well, we spoke. Where was I when we spoke? Well, it was before or after the. I was already in Hungary. Okay, so I think it was after the Iran war. We had a discussion. The Iran war started. We were talking about Lebanon, but back then that was before the statements by the defense minister talking about people south of the Litani, civilians cannot return home, and that shook me up when he said that statement. It made me empathize with concerns that people like yourself have. Is that Israel's intentions are more than dismantling Hezbollah?
I think Israel has been very clear especially when ministers like Eli Cohen, like Smotrich, Ben Gvir, and others, Eliyahu, the Minister of Culture, when they talk in Hebrew, and if you listen to them and consume Israeli media, they're clear about the Greater Israel Project. They've been clear about it for a long time, and now they're implementing the agenda. This has nothing to do with security. This has nothing to do with Hezbollah. This has nothing to do with containing Iran. This has nothing to do with anything regarding whether security or fear, or it has to do with a Greater Israel Project. And they've been implementing this for a longer time. The whole idea that Israel is now targeting civilian infrastructure, they've been doing this. What they're doing in Lebanon today is the Gazification of Lebanon. They're implementing the same doctrine they unleashed in Gaza for years, for 3 years, now to Lebanon. Not only that, if you look at the proposal, the kind of diplomatic proposal they're putting to the Lebanese government, it is exactly the same formula that put to the Palestinians for decades. It's very similar to the Oslo Agreement, dividing Lebanon in area A, B, C. That's exactly what happened in the West Bank. And if you look also to what's going on in the West Bank, there's no Hamas in the West Bank. There's no Hezbollah. You have a very compliant Palestinian Authority led by Abu Mazen, who is very, how can I say this, as submissive as it gets. Somebody that said openly that he not only recognized Israel, he recognized Israel also security concern. He talked about his village in northern Israel, saying he will never go back, and talked about reconciliation, coexistence. He cooperates with Israel in terms of security, and yet every night for the last, I would say, 3-4 years, you have, or even before, since this government was elected, the Netanyahu government, Netanyahu Ben Gvir Kahana government, every night in the occupied West Bank, you have pogroms, you have ethnic cleansing, you have terrorism led by settlers. This is what's going to happen in Lebanon. It doesn't matter you're Shia or Sunni or Christian. It doesn't matter. Their whole goal is to expand the territories. Zionism is a colonial project. And I think we need to understand that the nature of this colonial project, it's an expansionist, it is genocidal, and it's exclusionary. And not only that, Mario, look at one thing that I think is very relevant to the whole conversation. It goes hands in hands. They want the Greater Israel Project, which goes from the Litani River to the Euphrates, and they wanted to have a Jewish majority in these areas. They want a Jewish majority state. You cannot have a Jewish state when you have millions of Lebanese or Syrians or Palestinians. You have to ethnically cleanse them. So everything they are doing, don't look at what they're saying only, look at the deeds, not only the words. And this confirms to a lot of people like myself, but a lot of people that have been warning that Israel has used October 7 as an opportunity to expand its colonial project and get rid of everything that they call the axis of the resistance, whether Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran. And now they're demanding from the army in Lebanon to disarm Hezbollah. It's like asking, I think you tweeted this, I believe. It's like asking somebody to perform surgery on themselves. I mean, if an occupying power that is accused credibly of committing genocide before the International Court of Justice, their leader accused credibly of committing war crimes and crimes against humanity before the ICC, the International Criminal Court. And yet those are the leaders who are today demanding that Hamas disarm, Hezbollah disarm, Iran disarm, and they are not willing to disarm, are not willing to concede to the Lebanese people that they will have sovereignty or put in writing that they will withdraw from all the areas they conquered or they actually occupy in the last four to 6 weeks. You cannot kill 2,000 people in those 2-3 weeks. People who they killed are medics, are journalists, are civilians. I believe hundreds of children, of Lebanese children, were killed. When I saw on Easter Day what they did to Christian villages in Lebanon, and Netanyahu was talking about how Israel actually defend Christians, and they were asking the villagers to kick out Shiites. They're going to kick out everybody. They're going to ethnically cleanse Lebanon. Exactly, they're ethnically cleanse Palestine, the occupied territories of Palestine. They're going to do this also in Syria, and they're going to use the shield that they call diplomacy, self-defense, protection, security. These are all words, but behind and beneath all of that, the Greater Israel Project is the ultimate goal, the ultimate objective of this government, but not only of this government. Just to be clear, the overwhelming majority of Israelis actually endorse the war in Iran. They endorse what's happening in Lebanon. They have no problem with committing war crimes. The pilots who are bombing Lebanon are the secular leftist pilots that people around the world is like, well, there's a secular pilots and opposition. These are the pilots that are committing war crime. So there's no left or right in Israel. They're united when it comes to the Greater Israel Project.
Yeah, look, I agree with those concerns. Like, I've got a tweet here. Israel wants a buffer zone in Lebanon as a security guarantee against Hezbollah. I have a question. What security guarantees is Israel willing to give Lebanon that they want to annex their territory as they are doing in the West Bank? So it's like Israel's always talking about security guarantees for them, but how could it offer security guarantees for other countries? Israel's talking about Iran's nuclear program. What about Israel's nuclear program? It's not part of the NPT. So pretty much everything, most things we agree on. I have a question for you when it comes to the Greater Israel Project. So if this is Israel's goal, it's not peaceful coexistence, but it's just annexing as much territory as possible as part of the Greater Israel Project, then why, and I'm sure you've been asked that question before, why return the Sinai Peninsula to Egypt, which is 3 times bigger than the Israel today? So Israel had territory 3 times bigger than their country today, massive territory. They could 4x their country size, and they gave it up after they won that territory. So how would you explain that? And how do we know that they won't treat Lebanon like they do to Jordan, to Jordan and to Egypt?
Not that they gave it up really willingly. Remember, there was wars. There was not only conflicts and there's a contested narrative about the one war, but also in that period, remember when they gave there was also a different government in Israel. There was a different Israel, but above all, there was also an imposition from the international. There was also a different government in the United States. Remember, the whole idea that Israel, and I think in the last episode we talked, you and I, there was a major shift when Itzhak Rabin start negotiating with the Palestinians in the 90s and decided to open the door for coexistence with the Palestinians, and which led to the Oslo Agreement. That was, a lot of Palestinians are critical also of the Oslo Agreement. Didn't lead to sovereignty, it led to submission. But again, the international community was in a different phase. America was a different world. You didn't have Donald Trump, who is called by a lot of American Jews the first most important Jewish Zionist president, who is basically doing everything Netanyahu wants. I mean, in the negotiation from Islamabad, J.D. Vance was calling, Donald Trump was calling Netanyahu. According to a lot of people who are involved in the negotiation, especially British diplomats, they said,
that's maybe because it involves Lebanon and Israel has a role in what happens in Lebanon. That could be a reason.
But not only that, because Israel decides America's foreign policy. Just to be clear, Israel decides America's foreign policy. Donald Trump is doing exactly what Netanyahu wants. The America First basically gave up sovereignty and dignity, and Israelis are deciding today America's foreign policy in the Middle East. It's not driven by Washington, it's driven by Tel Aviv. But going back to the Sinai, remember when Egypt signed that accord and Jordan signed that accord, they received billions of dollars in basically the United States military aid. They continue to receive these billions of dollars, and in exchange of one thing, in exchange of, peace deal with Israel. Israel was supposed and gave the Sinai Peninsula and gave Sinai, whatever. But that was a different era where Israel was willing somehow to comply with a formula, which is peace in exchange for territories. That formula is gone, Mario. That idea was repudiated and led to the murder of an Israeli prime minister, Yitzhak Rabin. Why Yitzhak Rabin was killed? Because in the eyes of the fanatical, messianic, radical fascists in the Israeli government today, they view Yitzhak Rabin as a traitor to the greater Israel project. Remember, in 6 months because Rabin was killed, there was a huge protest in a square in Jerusalem. Netanyahu was in the balcony. The radicals were in the square. They were holding Rabin's coffin. 6 months before he was killed. They were holding his pictures wearing an SS uniform, a Nazi uniform. They were calling him a traitor. They were calling him a Nazi. They were inciting to murder him because he, again, wanted to talk or use the formula for Israel integration or Israel normalization with the Palestinians, which is territory in exchange for peace. We give you your territories, you give us peace in exchange. They killed Rabin. The guy that incited against Rabin openly and went to his car and actually broke a piece of his car, his Mercedes, was Ben Gvir, a convicted terrorist. Ben Gvir in his own house, he has a picture in his living room of the terrorist Baruch Goldstein, who killed 29 Palestinians the year after they signed the Oslo Agreement in Hebron. You're looking at a different Israel. This is an Israel that is led by fanatical radicals who view people like you and me like animals to exterminate, who view the whole territories in the Middle East in biblical terms. This is not the government that negotiated in the 90s, in the 80s, or in the 70s, secretly and not secretly with the Arab world. The whole idea that you can do, Netanyahu actually came with a very sophisticated formula, say normalization with Arab regimes, whether it's Bahraini, the others, whatever. But basically, he never had a war with these countries. It was an exchange of, weapon exchange. The Emiratis got the F-35s. Morocco got some kind of, deal, territories, annexation of the Sahara. But basically didn't touch on, he thought he could bypass the Palestinian and Lebanese issue. Then when he started negotiating with the Saudi, or wanted to negotiate with the Saudi, actually, kudos to the Saudis who said, we cannot do anything with you guys until you address the Palestinian question, which is sovereignty, withdrew from the territories. Remember, Mario, if Israel wanted security, in 2001, in Lebanon, they offered 22 Arab Muslim countries, offered Israel total normalization and integration in the region in exchange of what? Withdrawal from, that's 2001. Sharon was in government. Withdrawal from the occupied territories in the occupied Palestinian territories. Israel refused. They offered the same thing, which is the Arab Initiative, 5 times. They are offered total integration, normalization, security. I mean, I heard myself, the foreign minister of Jordan, Ayman, who stood up at the United Nations 2024, and he said in his own words, and I quote him directly, 55 Arab and Muslim country is willing today to defend Israel. To defend Israel. We are willing to normalize relationship with Israel and bring Israel in the fold and integrate Israel politically, diplomatically, economically with one condition: total withdrawal from the occupied Palestinian territories, those governed by Hamas and those governed by others. Actually, they went as far as say we're willing to put troops on the ground to protect Israel. And they actually demonstrated they're willing to protect Israel because in the 12 days war, Jordan especially intercepted a lot of missiles that were going towards Israel. So those offers were made 5 different times and they were always declined. Why did Israel decline all these peace offers? Well, there's only one conclusion. It's the Greater Israel Project. They don't want peace. They don't want integration. They want territory. They want expansion. They have the most important and the most powerful army in the region. They have 250 atomic weapons, which they actually threaten to use against Iran. Multiple ministers said that, in a very weird way. One of them said that they should use it against Gaza. Again, it's not about security. It's not about integration. All they care about today, as we speak, with this Israeli government, the mask has dropped and it's about annexation. It's about ethnic cleansing, expulsion, and breaking the region so they can dominate the region. Iran is the last frontier to them dominating the region militarily. And I think people should listen to Netanyahu's discourse in Hebrew. He said a discourse 2 days ago in his ministerial cabinet, where he talked about dominating the region. And it doesn't have to be with only annexation. He actually wants the the Gulf states,
GCC. Yep.
GCC, they want the Gulf state to depend on Israel militarily, but also economically. This guy is not only delusional, but he's thinking of a future where 400 million people living in our region basically are slaves, submissive to the Greater Israel agenda, which is total domination. And what scares me the most is this fragmentation in our midst in the Arab world, because I think a lot of people still think, oh, maybe we can get something similar to what Jordan got or Egypt, but that was a different era. And I don't think we can not understand what this government is today and the nature of the Zionist movement today in Israel. They're more radicalized, much more racist, much more genocidal. I mean, look at the laws that are being passed in Palestine. These laws will come soon to Lebanon. These laws will come soon to Lebanon, whether it's the death penalty law for Palestinians. They will implement it also in Lebanon if they control these territories. They will implement all the laws, the racist, genocidal laws that are committing now and implementing in Palestine against Palestinians. This is not going to be only an exclusionary or a special treatment for the Palestinians. Christian Lebanese, Muslim Lebanese, Shia, Sunni, it doesn't matter. For them, we are the enemy.
So, based on belief, if Hezbollah disarms right now, what do you think would happen?
Very simple. They will say, we don't trust really they will stay disarmed. We don't believe them. We have to stay in the territories because the only way we will feel safe. You have to understand that Israel's security doctrine today is very different. The security doctrine is connected to controlling the land, controlling territories, and for a lot of ministers is actually settling the land, meaning building Jewish settlements. The only way they can feel safe if they occupy in perpetuity, forever, those territories that they conquered. Occupation, annexation, ethnic cleansing, and illegal settlements. That's the only way Israel today feels safe. It is astonishing that 80% of the Americans were against the war in Iran, 80% of the I don't know if I'm still connected or not, but Mario, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I can hear you. Sorry, just cut out. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
So 80% of the Americans were against the Iran war. The juxtaposition with Israel is actually 80% of the Israelis are in favor of the war. Why is that? Americans view forever wars as a disaster economically, politically, and security, and they know that they lost most of these wars. The Taliban are back in power. You never achieve really anything with wars, especially in wars that are costly, strategically are a total failure. They understand that they paid a heavy price for the 20 years war on terror. The Israelis, They think that wars are the only way they can stay safe. Permanent occupation, forever wars. And if you look at the polls published by Haaretz, you can see clearly how this is a society that is totally radicalized, and see that military dominance is the only way to stay safe and secure. If when the head of the army in Israel said something like, for every person they kill, we have to kill 50, because it's just the whole mentality is about vengeance, dominance, and supremacy. When they turned back Pizzaballa, Cardinal Pizzaballa, kicked him out from going to celebrate Easter. And I went online just to read the comment about, why would you want to basically alienate the Catholic Church? The Pope, the most important religious community that we have in Palestine, but around the world, billions of people. Basically, it stems from Jewish supremacy. And we need to understand that this goes in hand, and it's like the basic ideology of this government: militarism and supremacy. Look at South Africa. What did South Africa do in the last 8 years of its governance? They attacked every state around them, every country around them. They start bombing them left and right, because they knew that internally they cannot sustain and look at their own policies without expanding those policies, and without the world looking at these policies and thinking with horrors, oh my God, this is about racial discriminatory, regime. So I think Israel in this moment is using the Trump last 3 years. They know that Trump will be the last Zionist president, and they're exploiting to the end everything they can exploit to implement that agenda, which is the greater Israel.
So your last point about Trump being the last Zionist president, actually, before commenting on that, I want to go back to... So I'll tell you my position. We had a back and forth last time. I tried to play devil's advocate because I agreed with a lot of what you've said. But I wasn't as worried as you are, or believing that the majority of Israel is one, the greater Israel project. Now, as time passes, and I speak to different people, the former speaker of the Knesset was on the show not long ago, and listening to people like him, and also seeing the comments by the defense minister about Lebanon, that really shook me. I started to question those beliefs. Now, let's talk about Hezbollah disarming. The argument that Israel makes, so the argument that they make about Lebanon, for me, makes more sense. I'm not saying it's justified. It makes more sense, putting aside the defense minister's statements, than the Palestinian argument. In Palestine, it's, I have no questions. What they're doing is horrific. They go to annex a Palestinian territory. They say very openly, we don't believe in a two-state solution anymore. So that's their position, the majority of them, and I clearly disagree with them. And unfortunately, I don't want to move on from this issue, because I hope more attention goes back to Palestine after this war ends. But just talking about Lebanon, because they're meeting right now, Israel and Lebanon are meeting right now in Washington. The argument that Israel makes is, we're happy to coexist with Lebanon as we do in Jordan and Egypt. We don't have our troops inside Jordan and Egypt right now. We have our troops in Lebanon. And Lebanon attacked us when Iran attacked us. Now, yes, they were bombing, Israel was bombing Hezbollah when they were meant to be ceasefire, but also the ceasefire included Hezbollah pulling out of the south, which obviously, based on this war, they did not pull out of the south. So if Hezbollah's goal is to protect Lebanon and deter an Israeli invasion, do you think they should disarm and merge with the Lebanese military, becoming one under one government? And when they're under the government, then obviously their goal is very clear. Our objective is defending Lebanon and not Iran. Do you think they should do that?
Look, I think I think we should all be united. I agree that there should be one army. They should, again, the government. I think you have any country. You shouldn't have militias versus an army. I mean, it in this moment, I think to unite is the only way you can survive. I know. I mean, I look at many countries that, for example, I think the fragmentation in any country help the opposition or help the other side. It doesn't help. I think there's also this. I'm sorry to use this word. This delusion. If you do everything Israel wants, you will get peace. You're not going to get peace. If just look at if I may, look at how they're treating even Egypt. Do you think Egypt is a sovereign state? Egypt is not a sovereign state. Egypt depends. I mean, at the beginning of the war, 2 missiles hit actually Egyptian territories. They said, oh, it's a mistake, whatever. It's like, that's not an army that makes mistakes. Those were warnings. I believe that the dynamic in Egypt, who runs the government, is dictated also by the United States, which is totally pro-Israel. I mean, I was in Egypt during the Arab Spring. We had a moment. Israel was terrified of that. Israel was terrified of the fall of the Mubarak regime, like they are terrified of the Orban losing the elections. Why? They don't want an Arab world that is independent, that's sovereign. They want it to be basically shackled to military aid from the United States or to the condition that they can dictate to them. The Egyptian signed multiple treaties with Egypt. Israel never respected any of these treaties. If you look even at the last economic accord they signed for the gas, Egypt never, Egypt actually was in good faith signing these agreements saying, well, we don't agree with what they're doing in Gaza, but we will sign these agreements because we need the gas and oil from Israel, whatever. They actually used that to blackmail Egypt on so many internal domestic issues, including the border with Gaza. When to open it, how to open it. That border is not regulated by Egypt. It's regulated on the Egyptian side by Israel. So you're willing to receive military aid or normalize with Israel, but you're relinquishing totally your sovereignty. That's what Jordan did. That's what Egypt did. And in exchange of that, you still have very, weak economically country, very weak, with a lot of corruption, with a lot of, I'm sorry to say this also, dictatorial powers. And ultimately, the overwhelming majority of the Egyptians and the Jordanians are not even allowed to voice their concern about the policy or even to speak about how their lives are ruled. Why Egypt wants dictatorship in the Middle East so they can claim to be the only democracy, but they want dictators who are corrupt so they can subjugate them, so they can dominate them, but also they can dictate to them what to say and what to do. Israel doesn't want a democracy or doesn't want the Arabs to unite like the European Union. They want them to stay fragmented because it's easier to control. It's the same formula that the British used: divide and rule. So again, if Hezbollah decide to disarm and melt in the army, totally in the Lebanese army, what guarantees really you have that Israel will respect the will of the Lebanese people or the will of the Lebanese government?
It's the same one that exists now. So right now, Hezbollah's military capabilities are the deterrent. So that deterrent becomes the Lebanese military, which has Hezbollah's capabilities. But it's a deterrent that answers only to one entity, and that is the Lebanese government and not the Iranian government. Because right now you have a Hezbollah that's acting as both. Hezbollah has 2 roles. One is serving what Iran's interests, and the other one serving Lebanese interests. And sometimes one supersedes the other, like what happened in this war. But when it's under the Lebanese army, is only one interest it has to follow.
The only country that is in this moment that pushed why Israelis are meeting the Lebanese, not because the government asked them to meet. They asked them for weeks. They rejected that. But because Iran put it on the table as part of the conditions.
But the reason this whole war started is because Hezbollah came to the rescue of Hamas and then Iran.
But again, when Hezbollah start bombing, they start bombing actually the occupied territories. I mean, we need to actually go back to the
Israeli targets.
Which was born first, the egg or the chicken? Israel continue to claim they have the right to do whatever they want. They actually claim they have the right to invade and bomb and do whatever. But do people in the region have the right to defend themselves and have some kind of resistance against an occupying power?
Of course.
I mean, again, I don't share what Hezbollah did in Syria. I'm not sure. I don't think it's
bombing.
I don't know if Iran really dictates everything Hezbollah does.
But 2 seconds. So Rula, bombing Hezbollah for months through the ceasefire, Hezbollah not responding, fair, is a calculated decision not to respond. And then suddenly Hezbollah attacking Iran days after Khamenei died, right after that, and apparently there was a split within Hezbollah. The political arm didn't want to interfere. The military arm didn't want to interfere. My position is I'm not on one extreme that Hezbollah is only serving Iran. That's one extreme. But also, I wouldn't go to the other extreme that Hezbollah is only serving Lebanon. They serve both. And in this case, they put Iran's interests above Lebanon.
Look, one thing I am sure, I think there's the survival of 400 million people in our region. That include Lebanon, that include Palestine, that include Jordan, that include Iran. And we have actually this genocidal regime in Israel that is willing to carry what our crimes. I know one thing. I've been talking to the UNIFIL peace mission, who are Italians, and they've been telling me that Israel was and continue to shoot at them inside Lebanese territories during the period of the ceasefire. You really think that when you're dealing with somebody that is so rogue and so emboldened and they really believe that the laws don't apply to them, they're willing to shoot against European peace mission, you really think that their real concern is Hezbollah and not actually, they have no regard for human lives inside Lebanon. We can discuss whether Hezbollah is more loyal to Lebanon or to Iran. I think this is a valid point. But in this moment of genocide against Lebanese and Palestinian jointly, I think the main question, do we have the right to resist that kind of occupation, invasion, ethnic cleansing, or not? And then I'm not saying that in the end we will not have to come to terms with the nature of who are the people who are opposing Israel and their real agenda, because that matters. But de facto, the only people who are today trying to stand up to Israel is actually Iran, because nobody else, Mario, nobody is managing to tell Israel, not even the Europeans or the Americans, to dictate on Israel to stop firing on Lebanese villages, which they continue to do throughout the ceasefire. 1,500 violation of the ceasefire, including killing of people.
Military means is doing it? Because how did that go after October 7th, which Iran was involved in, knew about? I think they knew something was going to happen. They didn't know the details. Multiple reports, I have no idea.
Yeah.
But did that work? Did the strategy of having Hamas, which is armed by Iran, attack Israel, and then Hezbollah getting involved, and then the Houthis getting involved? How did that go? Because yes, I understand you got to stand up to an aggressive military, militarily. But the outcome now is Gaza's been decimated, heartbreaking scenes. West Bank is still being annexed. They're still what do you call them? Israeli settlements being set up. The Houthis have been bombed heavily, and they've been financially they've been more strangled than ever. And now Iran has been just gone through a war. So how's everything since October 7th? It hasn't gone really well. Was it good beforehand? No. Does the status quo need to change? Yes. But was that the best way? By the way, if
my real question is to you, how would you change the status quo with an entity that is so emboldened? I'm not saying that what Hamas did, what Hezbollah is doing is the right thing. What I am saying today, as we speak, especially, when people blame everything on when before Hamas even attacked Israel, 244 Palestinians were killed in the West Bank, where they have a peace agreement. So again, I think history will judge this moment in terms of before what was happening and after what was happening. Normalization was not working and was not containing Israel. Israel was always going to do what they are doing. October 7 actually gave them an opportunity to do it faster and hide behind the shields of
because a counter argument also pressure is changed sentiment around it, because you said Trump is the last Zionist president, which I'm going to discuss about that as well, give you my thoughts. But the reason you said last is because the sentiment has changed around the world. You've seen European countries standing up to Israel, rightly so. It's great to see. The US is the last one. The reason that Israel is able to do everything is because of the complacency of the US, and that will shift now. We've seen politicians that are critical of Israel, Mamdani being the best example, getting a lot more politically, a lot more points politically.
Yeah.
But when you talk about Trump being the last Zionist president, look, it's hard to deny it. He said it himself with Muriel Ellison. They've been very open about it. But at the same time, when it comes to action, he did force Israel to end the occupation of Gaza, portion of it. They're still bombing it. They still occupy a big chunk of it. But they pulled out some of the territory. Not a win, a lot more would be, they should pull out of the entire Gazan territory and all of aid. There's still a blockade of aid, which is disgusting. All of aid should be allowed into Gaza. But at least something's been done there, which Israel was not happy with. And if Israel really controls Trump, then the Iran war should be ongoing right now. Shouldn't end, because Israel would want it to continue. By the way, if you see me go off screen and come back, I'm still here. I can hear you. It's just for the audience.
So Israel, Trump just announced that he's going to blockade the Strait of Hormuz. So how did the war end in Iran? It didn't end. The war continues. The dream team, Trump dream team, J.D. Vance, Jared Kushner, and Witkoff didn't achieve anything, failed in the negotiation again in Islamabad, like they failed in the negotiation before that with Iran. The economy is a disaster still. You know, Trump just announced that he wants to blockade that Strait of Hormuz in reaction to the blockade by the Iranians. I mean, like, clearly there's no strategy. But there's one thing that became clear to me after the New York Times published their report about how this war started. When Netanyahu on February 7th, he comes to the White House. They meet him in the Situation Room. In the Situation Room, they're sitting one in front of another. Trump is not sitting at the head of the table. He's sitting actually, in front of the Prime Minister of Israel, an indicted war criminal. And then he gives him all kind of, explanation how this war would be great, whatever. And Trump says, I like it. Then he doesn't listen to his generals. He doesn't listen to the Pentagon, who told him precisely what was going to happen in terms of, asymmetric warfare, the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, the attacks on allies in the region, in GCC state. And then he actually listened to Netanyahu, who tells him that by killing Khamenei, somehow there will be a regime change and people will rise up and will revolt against the regime. All of these are lies. Netanyahu comes to the US. When did he come to the US? February. This is when the war started. But also, remember what was happening in February? The Epstein files. Okay, so if Trump wanted to use this war as a distraction, or I don't know if Israel is blackmailing him at this point, but all of these, I'm not talking about conspiracy theories, but there's evidence that Trump, who campaigned on not wanting the war after Venezuela, thought, oh, I have appetites for doing these wars. But basically, it was Netanyahu who basically drove the agenda and decided that America, I'm not saying this, it's Marco Rubio saying that, Secretary of State of the United States. People who resigned from the White House in protest because they thought Netanyahu was driving in the driver's seat. Again, yes, Trump is instituted that peace, board of peace, whatever, that did not do anything. Did they open the border to get food inside Gaza? No, they didn't really. What did they do? They tried, and remember, when did that happen? That happened after Israel bombed Doha. While Hamas was there, they were negotiating with them, and they bombed them simultaneously. So somehow the world started protesting against Israel. I think especially the Israeli lobby that controlled everything in America, went to Trump's like, we need to change the tactic. But it was a change in the communication, in the style, but not in the substance. The substance continued to be that Palestinians continue to be exterminated in Gaza now. Yesterday, Mario, they killed a girl who's 9-year-old, Naja. She was sitting in a tent studying in northern Gaza, in her classroom, 3rd grade, they were studying. She was shot in the head. And this continued to happen every day in Gaza, in Palestine. Is Trump standing up? Where's the peace board? What are they doing?
The fact that,
what did they do?
Where's the aid?
Did
Let's
they
just
do
do the most
anything?
basic thing. The aid. Why the hell is the aid not being fully let in? What was the excuse for that? That one's just, initially,
because it's
like,
a
they didn't return all the
genocide.
bodies. They didn't return all the bodies. Well, all the bodies have been returned now, all
Yes.
the Israeli bodies. So what is the excuse now for not letting all the aid in?
There's no
Gaza is
excuse.
just,
It's a
inexcusable.
full-blown genocide. It's done by starvation, by bombing. But this is not going to stop in Gaza. When I talk about the Gazification of Lebanon, Mario, believe me, and I know it's when you look at the situation, they're trying to blame it only.
Doing some of it. No, they're destroying houses right now.
They're going to do the exact same thing in Lebanon. Nobody will be spared.
They've already done it. I'm not saying that's their intention, but to an extent, they've already done it. They've already asked people to leave their homes. Now they're destroying homes. I've seen the
Yes.
videos. And now they ask Lebanese people can't return home after the war ends.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
like, you know, there's
It's obvious.
you could justify these, but like this stuff doesn't, you know, I don't, even when someone's trying to look at these things objectively, it's just kind of treating me like an idiot by saying, oh, the intention is purely Hezbollah. I still give it the benefit of the doubt. Looking at Iran and Trump, now I understand he's saying negotiations failed. Negotiations just started, you know, for such a complex issue. You've seen Middle Eastern negotiations, including
Yes,
Israel,
I mean, I'm
Egypt.
talking about the peace in Islamabad, the initial peace,
that takes time.
21
I think that-
hours. Yeah.
The ceasefire is ongoing. There's a blockade,
Yeah.
etc., but there hasn't been any bombing. The negotiations, they're back on the table. There's statements now that they're pretty close. I'm just saying that if peace is reached now, a lot of Israelis are really pissed. I've guessed from Israel, they're really pissed by where things stand right now,
Yeah.
because right now Trump is looking at, he even talked about sharing the Strait of Hormuz,
Yes.
which would be disastrous for Israel. So I think what we could see right now is a pretty big turning point. Trump could turn this mistake, and it's you know, unquestionably a mistake what happened in Iran. I think it was, the intention was very different to what was the outcome, but that could be turned into something very positive for the region and positive for Trump politically, but not positive for Israel. And that is dismantling Iran's nuclear program and starting to do business with Iran, slowly starting the very slow process of normalization, like doing a joint toll of the Strait of Hormuz. That would be pretty disastrous for Israel. I'm sure Israel would not like them. And
that's why they will try to
shift.
sabotage by any mean. They will try to sabotage an eventual deal by any mean. Let me say something very provocative here. I don't think Jared Kushner or Witkoff are working for Trump. I don't think their loyalty is with the United States. Jared Kushner, and let's say who Jared Kushner is. Netanyahu used to go sleep in his own house and sleep in his own bed. Charles Kushner is, and the family of Kushner, they subsidize the illegal settlement in Israel. They're hardcore Zionists. If you really think their loyalty is with Trump, I mean, Trump must be really drunken on power to think that Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, really will put his interests, political interests, ahead of Israel political interests. It doesn't work like this. I mean, I hate even to bring this story, but it's I think it has very important relevance. Charles Kushner was the wealthiest man in New Jersey, the second wealthiest man in New Jersey. When his own sister didn't do his bidding, what he wanted, his own sister, he sent her husband, a prostitute, to have sex with him. His own sister husband sent her a prostitute to have sex with Jared's father, Charles Kushner, the ambassador to France, sent his own sister, a prostitute, to his sister husband, a prostitute, to film him while having sex. Then he took the video, brought it to his own sister the day the sister was celebrating her own son's wedding, to show her that her husband was, excuse my language, having sex with a prostitute, to blackmail her so she can submit to his will. Okay? The sister, who I believe is a very brave woman, called the FBI. Charles Kushner was arrested and convicted, and actually admitted to those crimes, which is this one, which is blackmail, tax fraud, and other frauds, and was sent to jail. Okay? If you are willing to do this to your own family, Mario, what you're willing to do, I'm like, the whole mentality. Jared Kushner went to the White House, and again, the governor of New Jersey at the time, who actually investigated the crime, Chris Christie, was working for Trump. Jared Kushner made sure to fire him from his position because he dared to put his father in jail. And he told Chris Christie, this is an issue for the rabbis. This is not an issue for the judges and law enforcement. I mentioned this story because it's an emblematic to a mindset. It's a tribal, it's a mafia-style mindset, but this shows you actually how they operate. They're willing to do this to their own sister. You don't think they are willing to blackmail Donald Trump or have dirt on Donald Trump? Then when Jared Kushner goes and meet with Netanyahu, just look at the way he looks at him, as if he's in love with he doesn't look at Trump the way he looks at Netanyahu. And I believe that the phone calls that were made from Islamabad to Tel Aviv, to Netanyahu in his office, were meant to find ways to scare Trump, and basically make him back off. Trump understands that this war is not popular in America. Most Americans are pissed, but also he understands another thing. He has to weigh two options. Does he want the dirt to come out, or he's going to stay in power anyway for 3 years. So he has to weigh the options. His loyalty towards his financiers who actually bankrolled his campaign, Miriam Adelson, Larry Ellison, and all these guys, but also the dirt that some people might have on him. And on the other side, he will have to think, okay, what do I have to lose? I have 3 years in office. I'm not going to be elected another time. I don't care what happens to the Republicans. They can basically go to hell.
Yeah.
And he can continue with this war with Iran. And because I think he also think another thing. He thinks that if he pressure more and escalate more, he might get more. I don't know if he can get anything. I mean, this is the same mindset that was in Vietnam. We escalate, we escalate, we escalate. And then guess what? It was the most catastrophic war in American history. This is going to be I think it's going to be even worse than the Vietnam War.
Do you think he will go back to war?
I think there is a huge chance that the Israelis will force him, directly or indirectly, to go back to war. They don't want this war to end, Mario. This is the best thing that ever happened to Netanyahu in 40 years. He said it himself. He is itching for this war to resume. He is itching to destroy Iran, not the regime as a nation, to cripple them politically, economically, civilly. I mean, when I heard Netanyahu and his generals talking about bombing civilian infrastructure, including basically, oil fields, what are they trying to do really and achieve? When they bombed also the gas fields between Qatar and that was Israel. What are they trying to achieve by bombing basically the livelihood, the lifeline for a nation economically? You're trying basically to crush any possibility that they can rise again and rebuild again and use their, economic power to finance whatever reconstruction they might have in the future. They don't want anybody to stand in their way. And the only way is to render Iran a failed state like Libya, like Afghanistan. So nobody can, after that, the whole region have to submit to them. Saudi Arabia is not going to stand up to Israel if they level Iran or they bump Iran to oblivion. Nobody in the region will. Iran is the last bastion that is standing up to them. We don't agree with what the regime is doing, right? To the people, we are critical of what they're doing. I think their crimes are horrific. However, strategically, I have to separate what they're doing strategically in terms of relation to Israel with what they are doing to the people. And I have to, and I have to think exactly like Israel itself. What Israel is doing to their own people who are going to the street to protest against the war. Did you see the videos of how they're beating people, how they're arresting people? I mean, you interviewed, I believe, the former head of the Knesset, right? He went to a protest 6 months ago. He was beaten. The guy was an interim president of Israel. He was the president of the Knesset, the parliament. He was himself beaten by the police for protesting against the genocide in Gaza 6 months ago. There's videos of that. He was shoved, he was beaten. So what the Israelis are doing, not only to the Palestinians, to their own people who oppose their policies.
That's very different too. I think violent police.
They're not killing them.
In Europe.
Yeah,
they're not killing them. And it happens in the US. You see violent police officers, always bad apples. I don't know, Avram was shoved. But in almost every country that you see, especially at a tense time like this, where the country's at war, a lot of people are just full of anger and hate towards Palestinians, which I'm obviously against.
But
I
can
just
I
wouldn't
say
compare
something?
What the Iranians did.
Let me just.
If anything, I'd give credit to the Israelis for one thing. What they did to the region, etc., to their country is horrible because their foreign policy is horrible. But they definitely stick up to their people, from what I see. The Jewish
I want to
Israelis,
tell you something that happened 10 years ago today. The Israeli military chief, basically, who at the time, 2016, basically made a comparison, said something about the IDF. He asked for basically treating Palestinians humanely. He said, when he talked about Nazi Germany and the Holocaust Memorial Day, he cited actually a nauseating trend in Israel: hatred, violence, paranoia, racism, etc. That was 10 years ago. His name is Golan. That same guy 10 years ago was attacked viciously for demanding to treat Palestinians humanely. He was called a traitor. That was 2016. That was way 10 years before what we're seeing today. I think we need to look at Israel's society today for what it is. The overwhelming majority really might not like Ben Gvir, might not like Smotrich. They're, they have only 10% of popularity, but I think their views are much more popular than we think. So when Ben Gvir
10%
goes
is already
to
10% is already too high for people
when
like
Ben
this.
Gvir goes to the Aqsa Mosque and pray inside the Aqsa Mosque and say, we own this place, and then they go and attack churches, and they basically, for them, nobody can exist outside a Jewish supremacist mindset and movement. And I believe we need to really grapple with the fact that what Israel is today, it's much closer to a fascist regime like the Mussolini one, that it is closer to one we think. They will start with the others, meaning they will start killing Palestinians and Lebanese, whatever, but sooner or later they will start killing the opposition. I think if you talk to a lot of Israelis, people like Gideon Levy, who, he has to live under police protection because they want to lynch him, literally lynch him for what he's saying and what he's writing in art.
Yeah, I've had Gideon Levy on the show. Rula, look, I really appreciate you coming on again. It's been a pleasure to speak to you. Gave you the mic a lot more this time than last time to really understand your perspective, because I'm really upset after the latest statements by the defense minister. So thank you so much for coming on the show again. And I'm sure I'll have you again as this goes on. Thank you, Rula.
Thank you, Mario. Thank you. And I hope your family and your friends in Lebanon are okay. And just
thank you so much.
My heart aches for Lebanon because it's the most beautiful country in the world, but also the Lebanese are our brethren, are our brothers and sisters. So truly, it's painful for all of us to watch. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rula.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. We've got Trita Parsi coming in to talk about the incredible negotiations that are happening, Teresa, the successful negotiations to end the war forever and make peace in the Middle East forever. How are they going, Trita?
They're going, I guess. The latest is that there may be another round of talks. We'll see if that's really going to happen or not. The Pakistanis are saying it. Trump has said it. The Iranians have not yet confirmed it. But I think I mentioned it on your show last time as well, that, look, neither side has said that diplomacy is over, despite the fact that J.D. Vance exited the talks in such dramatic fashion. And neither side has started shooting at each other. So all of these different moves and statements and, even the blockade of the blockade should ultimately be read as negotiating tactics within the negotiation rather than outside or against the negotiations.
I agree. I think as soon as Trump, and I've said this many times on the show, but I haven't said it to you, as soon as Trump started putting out those crazy posts that got everyone up in arms, I was one of the people that was less concerned, because for me, it just seemed that he's off-ramping. I got a lot of hate when I said that, but that was my stance. And as this goes on, everything we're seeing right now for me is a positive indicator. Trump choosing to blockade the Strait of Hormuz and responding to Iran's blockade with a blockade is Trump trying to seek any solution that does not involve going back into the war. So there's a report that Saudi is also encouraging the US to, I don't know which report to believe, but to avoid going to the war, which makes sense to me, because the last thing they want is the Bab el-Mandeb Strait to be closed or the Houthis striking the pipelines. Then Saudi's economy is screwed as well. So I think there's just too many powers, even on the Iranian side, which is, okay, that's your expertise. So that's how I see things. I think you'd agree. Respond to that, but also, what is Iran's appetite for peace? Who's making the decisions? We saw kind of two delegations on that first day of negotiations. First, it was the executives, the diplomats, the Speaker of the Parliament, Arachi and others, and the influencers or commentators like Morandi, advisors like Morandi and others. Then we saw and various ministers. And then we saw the IRGC commanders, the people that I think call the shots, or at least the ones that report to the ones that call the shots, arrive later in the negotiations. So I'd love you to kind of break down who was there, break down the developments on Trump's side, but most importantly, who makes the decision on the Iranian side and what the appetite there is for peace.
So on the first thing that you mentioned, look, I think we should be very tempered. I wouldn't be over optimistic, but the fact that the negotiations are continuing is in and of itself a positive sign. I think I mentioned your show before. I still think that the most likely scenario is that there isn't a deal, but there is a new status quo in which the US pulls out of the war. The Iranians continue to control the strait. It's a new ugly status quo from the perspective of many countries. But bottom line is, Trump just doesn't want to go back into this war, and rightfully so. It was a huge mistake going in. That would not be the ideal scenario for many, and it wouldn't be the ideal scenario for the Iranians. In fact, here's where I think the ceasefire may in some ways have shifted the leverage, the balance of the leverage to the US side. Before the ceasefire, Trump was in a desperate situation. He wanted out of the war, but he couldn't make a unilateral decision. He could not exit the war without the Iranians agreeing, because the Iranians could just continue to shoot, and that de facto would push Trump back in. Now I think the tables may have turned a bit, because Trump can now walk away from the negotiations. It would be the scenario that I mentioned. He's out of the war, but Iran controls the strait. If the Iranians resume shooting, meaning that the Israelis don't start it, the Iranians themselves resume shooting, they will be seen as the aggressors. And I don't think that is something that they can afford. So Trump can afford to walk away. It's not an ideal situation. Iran controls the strait. But what the Iranians want, and this gets to the end of your question, the Iranians do not just want an end to the war. They sent a massive delegation to Iran, the highest one I've ever seen, and talking directly with J.D. Vance. None of this charade of, sitting in different rooms and indirect. I mean, they were going straight at it. And I think it is because the Iranians, for the first time in 47 years, have now both gained the leverage and the opportunity to negotiate a complete end, not just to the war, but to the conflict, a reconciliation between the US and Iran. So they sent everyone they had that really mattered at this. And the fact that the IRGC came in later on, I don't think is necessarily surprising, because clearly the Iranians need to check certain things in the midst of negotiations. And they're in a compromised situation because of their communications and the Israelis continuing to try to kill negotiators. So it may have been that the IRGC showed up precisely because they needed to be in that place to be able to have those consultations within the Iranian delegation rather than being back in Tehran. But precisely because the Iranians want this, and because the Iranians need sanctions relief, in some ways the leverage is now on Trump's side. Not in the sense that he's winning the war in any way, shape, or form, but he can walk away. He would lose some, but the Iranians would lose more, because right now they see an opportunity to actually get sanctions relief and really get out of this situation entirely, rather than one of these ceasefires that end up becoming a Swiss cheese within days, if not hours.
That's a great way to portray it, because everyone's talking about how Trump is in a very difficult position. Trump is desperate. The global economy can't sustain this, which is true. But at the same time, Iran is in a very similar position. This is their chance to get out of the crippling sanctions, because one can argue they've been in war since 1979. And for 47 years, they've been in a state of war because of the sanctions. And a blockade now is actually an act of war.
It is.
So 2 questions. Who do you think will blink first? That will be the first question.
I think, first of all, Trump already has blinked first by agreeing to the ceasefire in the manner that he did. If you compare it from where he was before, he's going to have
civilization, destroying
exactly, and surrender within 4 days, etc., and then going to a ceasefire in Pakistan, accepting Iran's 10 points as the basis of negotiations. The fact that the Iranians continue to control the straits throughout the ceasefire, clearly Trump blinked first. But, who blinks first and who actually comes out on top of a negotiation is not necessarily the same thing. I still think Trump is in a very dire situation, but he's really managed to get himself out of the worst situation, because as long as the US is no longer in an active state of war, the Iranians, even if they want more, they're not going to close the straits. They're going to keep it open. It's just that they're going to be charging fees of the ships, because that's how they make money. They don't make any money by closing it entirely. So oil prices will come down as long as he doesn't continue the blockade of the blockade. And he will, manage to get out of some of the worst of his situation. He will have criticisms, clearly, from folks saying that, you started a war and at the end of the war, Iran is controlling the straits, which it didn't do before that. But Trump's own base will just be very happy that oil prices are coming down, gas prices are coming down, food crisis, etc., is avoided, and there's not going to be an endless war. There was an exit out of this, and that's going to be more important to Trump than what people in the blob say about him and his conduct and his performance here.
Sorry, I'm just taking notes. Just a point. So Iran is not blockading the Strait of Hormuz. They're just charging a fee for ships that go through. The US is only blockading ships that go in and out of Iranian ports. So we talk about Iran's economy getting choked off by Trump, but Iran is making money anyway by charging a toll on the other ships. So doesn't that mean Iran is in a good position to be able to sustain this more than the global economy, because they're not being choked off to zero? They can still charge a fee, which is $100 billion a year if based on normal traffic.
Well, I don't know if it's going to be that much, but
unless the American blockade, I think, applies to ships that do pay the toll. I think
yes, and it's been unclear because the CENTCOM has gone back and forth on that and said that they're only going after ships that are porting in Iran, which may not be all of the countries that are paying those tolls. But bottom line is, this was a kind of a silly step by the United States. Blockading a blockade does not fix the situation in any way, shape, or form. Iran has more than 100 million barrels of oil on the waters already, and they had already shipped out a lot before this, not just because of the sanctions, but before this war as well, because of a scenario like this. So they can sustain this longer than Trump can sustain oil prices being above $100, $120. So I don't think this was a winning card in any way, shape, or form. I think this is a negotiating tactic. It may not have much impact, but it may have an optical impact in the sense that Trump can then go back to his base and say, I won because I really strangled them at the end with this double blockade and they caved. True or not, that would just be part of his narrative. And to be frank with you, I would be very surprised if the US really goes after some of these ships, because the oil on those tankers are Chinese and Indian oil. They've paid for it. And if Trump is going to go and intercept these ships, a couple of weeks before he's supposed to have a very crucial summit with Xi in Beijing, I find that very surprising. So again, this is
Pakistani ships, which are the media.
And Pakistani ships who've been hosting these talks. So I think this is a lot of the type of charade that is just part and parcel of negotiations. I don't take it too seriously. I think the question is, the Iranians now really want a deal. They really want sanctions relief. The US is going to push hard on some of these nuclear variables. From what we've seen so far, the Iranians are willing to give way more, even after this war, on the nuclear issue than they were in the JCPOA. But they're going to ask for some serious sanctions relief in return.
What
and
will
they see
get?
that.
Their damage is about 270 billion, according to the the Iranian government spokesperson. What do you think they will press for, and what do you think they'll be able to get out of the Americans?
I think they're going to be pressing for primary sanctions to be lifted, which means the sanctions that the US is imposing on American companies. Those were never lifted in the JCPOA. The US in the JCPOA only addressed the secondary sanctions, which are the sanctions that prevented Chinese and European and GCC countries from trading with Iran or investing in Iran. By going after the primary sanctions, you're essentially really weakening the secondary sanctions. Because if US imposes sanctions on Iran only for other countries, but it allows its own companies to go in, it's just not going to be a tenable situation. Those primary sanctions, incidentally, are primarily through executive orders, which means that Trump can lift those with a stroke of a pen. Whereas the secondary sanctions are primarily through Congress, which requires, like the Caesar Act, a lifting of the sanctions, an affirmative vote in Congress, which is trickier to get, politically more challenging, more costly. I would say that after November, I don't see much of a chance of the US being able to lift the secondary sanctions. But before November, it may not be an impossibility as long as Trump still has that sway within the Republican Party. He's going to meet resistance undoubtedly, but there may also be other interests that will be awakened who recognize that access to the Iranian market, particularly after this war, is going to be a very attractive thing for American companies.
What else could Iranians get out of this? Do you think that they won't get any reparations? Will they be able to continue charging a toll at the Strait of Hormuz? Would they be able to get some of their assets unfrozen? But more importantly, they need to give something to Trump. Trump needs to have a political win, so this doesn't look like, hey, I went into war with Iran and we gave him a deal better than JCPOA.
Yeah. So first of all, on some of these other things, yes, I think they will continue to have a mechanism. And I think the US has itself even made proposals on how it could be part of that mechanism. In Islamabad, apparently the Iranians rejected.
Mechanism on the Strait of Hormuz toll.
Exactly. So the US actually would get a percentage of that toll. The Iranians rejected that. I don't think that is a hard rejection. I think there may be opportunities for the US to be able to get other things, perhaps making sure that a lot of those tolls are paid in dollars instead of crypto and yuan. Alternatively, the Iranians may agree to make sure that a percentage of those tolls are being used to buy American products from the United States, which again would then require the US lifting the sanctions. So it's a concession to the US, but it's also
treasuries. You mean like financial instruments? You mean by products?
No. I'm talking about goods and other things from the United States. So it's a way for the Iranians to give a concession to the US, saying we're going to purchase things from you. But on the other hand, that requires that the US lifts the sanctions on those primary sanctions. I think on the nuclear front, the Iranians are probably going to give him a lot that enables him to say that he got a much better deal than Obama. They already agreed to this in Geneva. Trump should have taken that deal. He didn't. He started a war instead. It seems like the Iranians are still operating from the basis of those proposals from Geneva instead of dramatically hardening their position on what they give. What they're getting is apparently where things have become more assertive on the Iranian side, in the sense that what they're asking for in return in terms of sanctions relief is greater. And as you pointed out, the Iranians are not going to get reparations. But reparations can be baked in, at least rhetorically in the type of sanctions relief they get, etc. And the tolls can also be treated as a reparations, but sadly it will be Asian countries that will pay the reparations, not the ones that actually started the war, even though those Asian countries had nothing to do with this war. And as you have seen, already the South Koreans have traveled to Iran, and the Japanese apparently are on their way there as well. The Spanish just reopened their embassy there. And I would also say something else I think is important to you, Mario, mindful where your family is from, that we've seen the Europeans really issuing some much, much stronger statements and also taking some measures against Israel and its bombardment of Lebanon. I don't find that to be unrelated to the fact that the Iranians have been insisting that the end of the ceasefire, or the end of the war, also has to encompass Lebanon. And we've talked about it before, why the Iranians find this to be important. But I find it just interesting that the Europeans now suddenly have found their courage to push back against Israel, now when they know that there is a substantive pressure on Israel to end that war that is coming from somewhere else that has nothing to do with Europe.
What a win. What an insane strategic win for Iran. We were talking about dismantling Hezbollah before this war. Now we're talking about Hezbollah potentially remaining there and potentially being part of the negotiations, some sort of agreement with Israel. European pressure for Israel to stop hostilities completely without the disarmament of Hezbollah. We were talking about Iran dismantling their nuclear program before this war. And at best, what was there in response? What were the Oman discussions? What was the US conceding in the Oman discussions? Do you remember?
Nothing. They just walked away from the deal. Originally, apparently, according to accounts, there were some positive noises, but once it got back to Washington, it became clear that the US was not accepting it. And it appears to have been that the US was not inclined to accept it anyways, because Trump had already made a decision to go to war. And particularly the pieces that have come out that suggest that about a week earlier on, US and Israeli intelligence had picked up the whereabouts of where the Supreme Leader was going to be on that Saturday, suggests that the last round of talks, which I believe was on Thursday or Friday, was already doomed because the US had already made its decision to go and kill the Supreme Leader, which fits with the larger image. And I remember you and I talking about it beforehand. Trump was under the impression that the Iranians are so weak, it was not worth making a deal with them. Either there should be surrender, total surrender, or there should be war. And within that war, either the Iranians would surrender or their system would collapse altogether. And as you pointed out, we're in a very different situation right now.
And you know what's going to be fascinating to watch? This is all just extremely fascinating. Now we can smile about it because at least the bombing is stopped. Not in Lebanon, but at least the main war is stopped.
But on Beirut, it appears to have stopped, and hopefully it will stop altogether.
Exactly. It's dropped significantly, yeah. But we can smile as like how this is all unfolding. First, I've criticized Trump so much for starting this war. I think this is one of the dumbest freaking wars of my generation. and yours and all of our generations. But I applaud him for just walking away, because that is such an insane loss. And what's going to be fun to watch, a political masterclass, is how he's going to turn that into a win back home for people that are not watching this very closely. And the Iranians are going to be very smart. They're going to give him a political win. It doesn't need to be a strategic win. It just needs to be something where he can go back home and say it was a win. My only question is, why go to war in the first place? What was you said that they're full surrounded, but if they're willing to dismantle the nuclear program, why else?
It wasn't a dismantlement of the nuclear program. What was agreed upon, or what was on the table in Geneva, which the Iranians had agreed to, which was the Omani proposal, had two critical components that have been made public. Or at least some of this part has been made public before. One is, of course, that the Iranians would only enrich on a needs basis, which means that they would only enrich for the purpose of producing nuclear fuel pads for two identified reactors. A reactor in the province of Khuzestan that it won't go online for another 7 years. And for the TRR, which is a research reactor that the United States gave Iran in 1968 that produces medical isotopes for cancer patients. By saying that it will only be for these two, and the fact that these don't need more fuel pads for another 5 to 7 years, a very clever idea had essentially emerged, or solution had emerged, that would allow Trump to say, I got the Iranians to agree to zero enrichment. For the next 5 to 7 years, they wouldn't be enriching at all. And then when they would enrich, they also agreed that there would be no stockpile, meaning they would not hold any enriched uranium on their soil. Immediately, once the uranium was enriched, it would immediately be produced into fuel pads. And as a result, without a stockpile, there's no pathway for a nuclear weapon. And this is much stronger than what the JCPOA imposed on the Iranians. And this would have been a win. It still is a win. It's just, unfortunately, if they go back to that type of an agreement, something that they could have done without this stupid war in between.
I'm glad you called it stupid as well. All right, so who's making the shots right now? Who's making the decisions in Iran? Is it the supreme leader? What do we know about him? Is his face really disfigured? Is he calling the shots? And do we have a more hardline Iranian regime, or how pragmatic are they now compared to before? Because if they're pragmatic, we might see the beginning. I've become, from being very worried during the war and very upset, to now being extremely positive and optimistic, which is tend to be my personality. So I'm always more optimistic than others, and I'm always cognizant of that. But the reason I'm extremely optimistic, which you just warned against, is because I think this could be a massive turning point for the entire region. Why? The sentiment in support of Israel shifted everywhere, especially in the US, which is the main country it needs to shift in for things to change in the region. That's number one. Number two is Gulf countries will now need to coexist with Iran. Iran's also very weak, and they understand that their survival is still at stake right now. Remember, the protests in January are not going to suddenly disappear. They could pop up again, and that's a weaker regime. They also know that a big red line has been broken. The US has struck them once. They might strike them again, a red line that everyone's avoided. And while Iran won the war, at the same time, the US has shown willingness to cross that line. So putting all these together, we may see, depending on what Mushtaba, if he is the one calling the shots, what his foreign policy strategy is, especially when it comes to the proxies. I think there's a possibility, I'm not saying in likelihood, because I still think it's unlikely, but very possible, a possibility of a massive shift in Iranian foreign policy, potentially even away from proxies and more around coexistence. Why? Because they have the Strait of Hormuz as a deterrent. They don't need the proxies as much as they need before. Gulf countries need to coexist with Iran. They also see Israel as a bigger threat. Remember, Gulf countries, even though they were attacked by Iran, they're really pissed off at Israel. They made those sentiments really clear. The Haptur letter, Al-Haptur letter is one of the ones I referenced, but there's others that made similar comments. So we may see a fundamental shift in the region, one that started after the strike in Qatar by Israel, that continues from now, including a massive shift in American foreign policy. So Trump does U-turns all the time, and he might shift from bombing the hell out of Iran and killing their supreme leader and their commanders and talking about wiping out a civilization, to saying they're a great regime and doing business with them and sharing tolls, a percentage of the tolls. So do you agree with me that there's a possibility, even though unlikely, that we might see such a fundamental shift in the region?
I agree with you that there are some reasons for optimism. I don't agree to the full extent that you expressed at some of those points. I think almost all of your points have validity, but I think I may be not as optimistic about all of them, at least compared to how you expressed it. So if we take them one by one, yes, the shift in the United States is dramatic. It was already starting before all of this, but this has just nailed it. I mean, even before, when you had the first war in the summer, you could see that the conservatives really had turned against Israel. And now we see that, Israel dragged the United States into a losing war, a terrible, terrible war, and really embarrassed Trump. And, so the manner in which and the numbers also show that for the first time now, there is even a majority of Republicans that have a negative view towards Israel. So I think that shift is going to happen. It's going to happen faster than many had predicted. And the more Israel does things of this kind, the faster it will shift. That's one. I do think, I would perhaps express it a little bit differently. I think we have now seen that 47 years of containment of Iran ultimately led to exactly what many of us had warned about, which is that the logical conclusion of containment is a military confrontation. And that's why it should have been much better to go down the path of JCPOA, lift sanctions, and try to get some form of integration between Iran and the GCC states and the rest of the region. That, of course, requires a lot of compromises on all sides, including, of course, from the Iranians. But that, I think, would have been a better path, because now we know what this path is. And not only do we know what this path is, we also know that the US tried war and it failed.
Yeah.
So, to go down the path of containment again, knowing that it risks another war and that the last war actually was strategically lost, doesn't make any sense. Now, that doesn't mean that there ain't a lot of tremendous high sentiments and anger on all sides. The GCC states, many of them, are very, very angry at Iran. They're very angry at Israel, as you pointed out, and they're very angry at the United States. And I think they have cause to be angry at all of them, but they should also be a bit angry at themselves for some of the strategic decisions they had made. Not all of them, but most of them. And there's going to be a need for that integration, and that's going to be hard, mindful of what Iran has done to them. It's going to be hard from the Iranian side because they do believe, and there's some data that shows that attacks also did occur from GCC territories. I mean, we see some
which
of these.
Ones? Kuwait, other than Kuwait, which ones?
The Iranians point to Kuwait, they point to Bahrain, to UAE and Saudi. The Kuwaitis completely deny it, of course, so do the Saudis, but we're also seeing that a lot of these airplanes that are used for both intelligence as well as for refueling were destroyed by the Iranians on airfields in Saudi Arabia. We've seen the trackers of Israeli planes flying in and out of Saudi Arabia over and over again. So clearly, there is a lot of anger on both sides and probably some cause for it. But they do need to get over that, because there is an opportunity now after this war, if everyone is wise and plays their cards the right way, for an inclusive security order that follows this, that is not based on the containment or the exclusion of any state. And in my view, ultimately, it should also not be based on the exclusion of Israel. Israel too needs to be included. But in the proposal we have developed at the Quincy Institute's Better Order Project, the ticket price for the Israelis to be included, which they ultimately have to be, is a Palestinian state based on 1967 lines. That's the price they have to pay to get the ultimate security, which is to be reintegrated into the security architecture.
That's an audacious request, Trita. I thought that ship is
Why is
sailed. I
that?
would love it to be there. It just, everyone I talk to, even people that are very critical of Israel, like I have become, they just say, Mari, that we've kind of given up. The behavior of the Arab states, they were talking about normalizing relations before October 7th. Without going back to the 1967 borders, it just feels like that ship is. It feels like it. Like, look what's happening in Gaza, the settlements that are happening in the West Bank, the sentiment in Israel. I'm not an expert on this as much as you are.
And there are people much more knowledgeable about Israel-Palestine at Quincy, like Khalid Al-Gindi, who is also very skeptical, and he probably is right. My point, however, is that a lot of ships that we thought had sailed may not have sailed. These shifting winds, as you put it earlier on, is going to need us to be very creative of how we think about security and the architecture of security in the region going forward. And some ideas that long ago were seen as dead on arrival, such as the integration of Iran with the rest of the region, is actually going to be a necessity going forward. And we have to figure out some way at the end of the day to make sure that Israel is not the new Iran, the country that everyone else is just organizing against, because ultimately that will not bring about security, and nor will it bring about justice for the Palestinians. So there has to be some sort of an integration. What is the shape and form of that integration, and what is the price of it? The price of it, in my view, is that there has to be absolutely equal rights for the Palestinians, and their right to self-determination has to be upheld like everyone else's. Now, whether that takes the shape of two states or whether it takes the shape of something else, others know more about. But I do believe that it would be a mistake if in this moment we're only going towards integrating the Persian Gulf and leave the rest of the region to the side and don't address the issue of Israel-Palestine, precisely because the winds are changing, not just in the US, but also in Europe on Israel, I think necessitates to revisit that issue and make sure that the Palestinian cause is not forgotten.
As a final question, I'll ask you that just a comment. A report came out now. Not sure what the source is, but the first direct talks between Israel and Lebanon since 1983, since the war, they lasted 2.5 hours. They've just ended. A U.S. official, no, I'm not sure if that's, sorry, I'm not sure what the source is. Both sides described the talks held in the U.S. as positive. That's U.S. and that's, sorry, both, I'm guessing Israel and Lebanon. As a final question, what do you make of that development? That's a very, very significant development for Lebanon, for Israel, and for the region as well. The world's obviously mainly paying attention to Iran, but do you think that, what do you think those negotiations will yield? Because Hezbollah is pretty adamant that they're not going to be part of it, and then they're pretty upset at these negotiations happening. So it seems to be existential for Hezbollah.
Well, I mean, Hezbollah is viewing it probably as a situation in which the Lebanese government is going to try to meet the Israeli demands of disarming Hezbollah. And the Lebanese government earlier on decided not to do that because they knew that they couldn't. And if they were pushed into it, there would be a civil war. So between a civil war or being bombarded by Israel, they chose the latter. Hezbollah now wants them, of course, not to go for disarmament, but actually get a ceasefire with Israel and Lebanon altogether, in which Hezbollah continues to have its role within Lebanon. And of course, in my view, that is a Lebanese issue, and there's plenty of Lebanese who don't want to see Hezbollah armed. But I assume that there also must be quite a few Lebanese who recognize that without Hezbollah, the Lebanese army simply does not have any deterrence against Israel. And Israel has already said that it wants to annex parts of Lebanon, do the same thing to Lebanon, what it's done in the West Bank, what it's done in Syria. And the US approach to all of this throughout has been to only arm and train the Lebanese army so it becomes strong enough to take on Hezbollah, but never strong enough to have a deterrence against Israel. And Lebanon has to make a decision that does it want to be an independent state that can deter any aggression from any one of its neighbors, or is it going to accept being in a weak position in which it will have the extent of security that the Israelis allow Lebanon to have?
That's a tricky one. All right. Trita,
thank you so much for having me.
All these interviews. Let me give you some compliment. Applaud you for doing all the interviews throughout the war, despite how difficult it was for you. So you've done great coverage on this, and always a
thank you. I appreciate it.
So thank you, man.
Thank you so much, Mario. Appreciate it.
See you soon.
Talk to you soon. Bye.
All right, everyone. We've got one of our favorite guests coming on. Karen, how are you?
I'm fine. Fine.
Are you as optimistic? I'm good. I'm pretty optimistic at how things are going. You didn't hear the beginning of the interview, but I started being optimistic when Trump made his crazy comments. I've said this so many times, the audience must be tired of it, but because I thought he's off-ramping. But like, as this develops, everything I'm seeing right now is both sides avoiding confrontation. No one's really pushed the line too far. They're both focusing on a blockade, but there's a rearmament happening at the same time. And there's other people that are a lot less confident than I am. They're talking about the two sides being very far apart. Where do you stand on all this and how this has all progressed, the negotiations since the ceasefire?
Yeah, I mean, I guess they're going to meet on Thursday. Is that the latest that they're saying? There's going to be another I assume in Islamabad, or is that where they're saying they're going to meet? Okay.
Again, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good sign. And also it's a good sign that Iran has not tried to sink any ships, and the U.S. side of this so-called blockade is behaving cautiously, I think. I mean, they're not being super aggressive. And they're not particularly close in to where the Iranian ships are, but it's still not a lawful. Nothing about this war has been lawful or in compliance with any type of international code. This is a war of threats and bullying and bombing and more threats, and it's a three-way war. Well, four-way, really, if you count poor Lebanon, but you've got Israel with its own objectives, kind of participating through the back door in every single negotiation that the Americans have, not really openly attending them. But like Netanyahu said, he's got people in Washington who call him many times a day to let him know all the things that are happening. And then he instructs them as to what he wants to see. And you've got that meeting that they had that fell apart over the weekend. That could have been something. But you had the same Zionist real estate experts in the room. The same guys who negotiated, before when they got attacked. I mean, those guys are not trustworthy. And it's not that they're personally not trustworthy, but because of their shared experience in this Iranian process, they cannot be trusted, and they shouldn't be there. They shouldn't be there. And so the fact that they are there kind of gives you a little clue how really out of touch with reality the Trump administration is. And that means they're not really negotiating. If you really want to negotiate, you put your effort into it. And they have not done that. In fact, they've sabotaged any of these negotiations. So, maybe Thursday they won't sabotage. Maybe they will be able to move forward. I think the pressure on the U.S. from some of like China and European countries, it's got to mean something. Maybe that's what's pushing them into it. I don't really know.
Can the US really afford to go back into war? And can Iran afford? Do you think either side can afford a war? Because the US, obviously, the global economy was suffering and Trump was suffering politically. And on the Iranian side, obviously, they're getting bombed to oblivion.
Yeah. Well, in theory, Trump seems to think if this blockade actually helps him out, because he says all you guys that want to get oil can come into the Gulf of America and buy the oil from American oil dealers and refineries. So he seems to want to get in on high-priced oil, as America being an exporter of oil and gas too. So it seems like, he's kind of seeing what he likes that the Iranians are doing out of necessity, because they were attacked and they have no place to go. They are not an expeditionary warfare situation. That they were attacked and they're defending their territory and their people. But he seems to like some of the things that they've done, and he wants to adopt them. The fact that Iran has is making money, or was, with the fees for the transport of oil. The fact that Iran was making deals with other countries. Trump likes it. He wants to get in on that. He in fact, I think at one time he proposed, Iran and the Ayatollah and I we will jointly tax the transit in the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, he really, and again, the fact that he likes it shouldn't have anything to do with U.S. foreign policy. That should be much more rational. But you see Trump responding to things. He's like a little kid. He sees something. Oh, that's cool. I'm going to do that. The strait was open. Trump closed it. Or Trump affected it to be closed by the Iranians. Iranians then profited from that to some extent. And now Trump wants to do the same thing. So he's got his own closure outside of the strait. It's really, it's, have you ever seen those gummy bear commercials? It's Haribo gummy bear commercials, and they have little cartoon children characters, but they're at actually it's the full grown people, but they have little children's voices. And they're around an adult conference room table. They're doing business, and all of a sudden they start eating the Haribo, and they revert into 4 and 5 year olds, and it's just the most funny and pleasant thing.
The opposite of the Snickers ad. The Snickers, when you eat it, you kind of transform into a cooler, more mature person, more capable.
Yes,
person.
that's opposite.
Opposite of that. Yeah, but if he pulls it off, that will be. I don't know. People look at it as economically. First, it will be the business deal of the century. I just struggle to think he would, because the global outcry would be insane, because he's breaking international law. Nobody should be able to charge at the Strait of Hormuz. So if he manages to do it, again, short term, it might be good for the US. Politically, it might be a good look for him. But the international community being able to charge, because that would just open up the door for other countries that have controls of their own straits, which are considered international waters, to be able to charge a fee. And that will cause significant issues, or weaponize these straits. And that would cause significant issues to the global order that has existed since World War II. So that's pretty concerning.
Yeah, but see, Trump doesn't care about that global. He doesn't care about the order. Trump is very. I don't think he's strategic. I think he's short-sighted. He's, like I said, he sees something he likes. He wants to go do that. He likes he likes money. You know, this idea that, in fact, he's been like this ever since he's been president, even the first time, I think, but it's more noticeable the second term. You know, he talks about we're going to make money, like the United States is going to make money. But he really, oftentimes he says, I'm, you know, I and we. So he seems to think the idea of making money for a country, for a nation, very complex marketplace, many different resources. It's not all directed. You know, we don't have a directed economy. But in Trump's mind, it is a directed economy. It is
well, like
Trump's
also for his
economy.
legacy as well. Like legacy is so important to him. So like
Yeah.
this is what worries me for the war is like if this deal, if Iran doesn't give him a deal that could be good optically for his legacy,
Mhm.
then I worry he could. Are you worried that this war could return, that they might not reach a deal?
Oh, I think so. Yeah. Well, first off, I don't know if you saw what the top military guy in Israel said just yesterday.
Yeah, I think I know what you said. I think I
Yeah,
saw it.
he said regime change has to happen. He says our objectives
Yeah.
won't be met until there is a friendly to Israel regime in Iran. So, you know, that he's being very firm that, of course, there'll be endless war, which is in the interest of Israel, of course. But we're allied with them, so that makes me worried that as long as we're allied with them, yeah, there's going to be continual war. As long as we are as long as we're willing, or the American president is willing to conduct war on behalf of Israel, or wars that are helpful to Israel in Israel achieving its own interests, then there's going to be war, because Israel has no plan for peace. You know, Israel is, well, it's an American problem, certainly. It's a problem for the world. But, you know, what they're doing in Lebanon, and this idea that they have talks, you know, they're going to talk with the Lebanese government. Under what basis would the Lebanese government be able to do anything other than submit to whatever the U.S. and Israel tells them to do? I mean, they don't have the military strength to respond. In fact, last week, there was something that the Lebanese government wanted to go into the southern part of Lebanon. I don't know if it was to fix something, maybe fix a water system or something, but they couldn't because Israel did not give them permission to go into their own territory. Now, again, from an American perspective, if you have territory, like, you know, what if we wanted to fix something in Texas and we said, well, we really want to fix this well that we found, this water system that's been blown up by the Mexicans, but the Mexicans are not allowing us to go do that. So we're just going to wait until they say it's okay. That's not a very American response. I'm telling you, Americans do not understand that. They don't understand how the situation that is in Lebanon, that really, and I don't understand it either, but certainly they don't have the power. They have no power in this deal. They have nothing to do except submit to Israel. It's a show. To me, it's just a show. You know, it's a show diplomacy, a show negotiation. So that doesn't even really matter. But yeah, Israel wants the war in Iran to continue to percolate along. Maybe it goes hot, maybe it goes cold, but it's going to percolate along indefinitely into the future. That's what they want. And as long as what Israel wants is what the U.S. is willing to do, then I'm not hopeful.
What do you think China's role will be if both countries stick to their guns in these negotiations? And we see the Iranian blockade ongoing, and then whatever gets through gets blocked by the U.S. So essentially, total blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. Mm-hmm. What happens to other countries? What happens to first the American allies that will suffer from this the most? Yep. Japan, Pakistan, India, South Korea. And what will happen to China? And what would they do about it? Because China has been very vocal against this. They've said that, hey, our ships are going to go through. We have the right to do that. Yeah. Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz. That's the exact words. The Chinese Defense Ministry said Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz. Mm-hmm. So how far do you think China would go in
I think
safe passage?
Okay, I do trust our taco president. So Trump will not sustain this blockade. I do believe that. I think, first off, our U.S. military is especially the Navy, it's not something that can sit forever and ever and do things, right? I mean, a Navy deployed forward has to have its logistics. It has to have all kinds of things brought to it. And we're not really in a position to sustain a blockade for any great length of time. Plus, as I understand it, yes, there are a number of ships there. I don't know what the number is. There's the carrier battle group, which is sitting. Now they said the Lincoln is like 200 nautical miles off, but the battleships or the particular types of ships that are kind of really organizing this blockade, there's only like a couple of them, and it's a big area. The ships that are going through are attempting to, not squawk and to go silent or whatever, misidentify themselves. So there's all that. Anyway, it's not something. It's really like a stunt. I see it, and this is my opinion, of course. Obviously,
Yeah.
I think it's more of a stunt because in some ways it's working. In the sense that it's angering China and it's enraging our European allies who need to have this oil and gas and other things. So it's a stunt that's working to create a negative situation for a lot of people. So Trump, when he backs off of that, it doesn't. We can't sustain it for very long anyway. So as long as he drops that blockade and makes it like it's a big give, a major give, then he can look like, he's going to get a lot for that. Anyway, I see a lot of this as theatrical rather than a functional blockade. And also, if it was a functional blockade, considering that our Gulf allies in particular require their supplies, their food, who knows what else coming through there, it is illegal. It is illegal by international law, not that Trump cares, but this would be a big problem. It is illegal to blockade food and medical aid and that kind of thing. That is just, you cannot do that. If the blockade has to be focused on something in particular that is related to the war effort. And it is an act of war. It's one more act of war. So anyway, I mean, because he's done it, I think he can sustain it for a short time. Of course, it demonstrates how much worse this thing could get. So maybe this will be where we can have a negotiation, but not with Witkoff. If in Islamabad they send Witkoff and Kushner back with whoever the team lead
That'll
is,
be insulting. That'll be insulting.
Yeah, she could do it. I mean, anybody but somebody who works for Israel. And I'm sorry, Kushner and Witkoff are not doing their work for the United States of America. They're just not. And even if I'm wrong, and they were, even if they were, nobody would believe that they are because of their past history up to this point in advocating and advocating for what Israel wants and undercutting negotiations. And in some cases, I think in the past, directly lying to the president about what went on. So these guys need to be off of this thing. And if Trump can't figure that out, then that means he's not serious. And this is just going to continue to be a dance that goes on. Meanwhile, the cost to the world and the world supply chains and energy chains and everything else is just going to keep, accreting. It's going to be more and more and more.
Yeah. It's just a question who will blink first. And as you said, you think Trump will blink first, but Trump needs something. Like, this has been already such a big strategic loss for the US. It's hard to portray it otherwise. I'm sure he can, because a lot of people already, even people that are, that are following closely, that are, understand politics and understand strategy, still believe this is a win for the US. But they also always say depends on the outcome of the negotiations. But if the outcome of the negotiations is if just certain limitations similar to the Oman negotiations of Iran's nuclear program, it's going to be very hard for Trump to twist this into a win. So what do you think Iran could concede for Trump so he could concede back to them in releasing some of their funds, lifting the sanctions? So in other words, what do you think Trump will get out of this, and what do you think Iran will get out of this?
This is a hard question. Clearly, the Iranians are willing to still talk about no nuclear weapon development because they have never admitted or advocated getting a nuclear weapon. They consider their enrichment to be done for peaceful civilian energy purposes. And that's always how it's been done. And that's what the IAEA inspectors had indicated it was. So anybody that's objective about Iran and has watched Iran knows that they're not trying to develop a nuclear weapon. And we did do a regime change, of course, and we got rid of the one guy that was standing between a nuclear weapon against the hardliners who said we must have one. And now the other guy there is it's not clear what his views are on that. But I think they have. I think the Iranians will be flexible on no nuclear weapon or a moratorium. Maybe not 20 years, because 20 years is insane. That's not even serious. Okay, first off. And also, without a treaty of inspections, of mutual participatory inspections, anything they say, like, I'm not going to do it for 5 years or 20 years, it's all irrelevant anyway. So I'm not sure our guys on the American side are coming prepared for, like, if you say, okay, we don't want you to have a nuclear weapon for 20 years, you would think that the team of people that they brought last weekend to Islamabad would have had a plan for how they would not just propose that, but how they would measure it and how they would inspect it and how they would ensure it. Okay, so now we're talking another treaty, right? We're talking, and treaties require work, they require research. Where's the State Department here? Where is the State Department in these negotiations? Vance doesn't work for the State Department, and neither do the two real estate agents. They don't work for the State Department either. So if we are not going to even appear to be serious, then nothing's going to happen. But if the U.S. can come across as serious, I think nuclear weapons will be an easy give for the Iranians. They don't have one now. They're not developing one. And so to say they won't have one in a period of time under mutually agreed inspections or something like that, that would be an easy give. I think Trump would be able to give back the seized money, because that helps America. You know, when you take other countries' money and you say, oh, I'm holding it, but then you hold it for like 20 or 30 years and you never give it back, that's called theft. And when a great nation steals from other great nations, the word gets out, right? And you don't trust them. So America has a huge trust issue anyway around the world. So I think this would be something,
especially after Russia. Like, this only makes it worse.
Absolutely.
After the whole.
Absolutely. And then there is no doubt Trump can take credit for the brutal bombing of military and civilian targets throughout Iran. Brutal, destructive, hospitals, all the stuff that they bombed, very much in an Israeli style decimation of these major cities. So Trump can say, we did that. We bombed the heck out of, how he likes, he can really get some flowery language about how hard he bombed them, how much pain he delivered, and that they couldn't say anything. They had to submit. If Trump likes to use that language, I think that the Iranians don't care. They know what they suffered. They're willing to suffer more, a lot more. Okay. So Trump could conceivably say, I beat the living heck out of the Iranians. I switched out their government. They're not going to get a bomb. Yeah, we're going to release the money. And then Iran has a really cool thing going on up until this blockade, I guess, with the transit fees. And that's something both Oman and Iran could do in the future. Honestly, it's in their 12-mile economic zone. So they have a choke point that they could monetize. Iran monetized it for a short period of time, and that helped them. I mean, they took in a number of billions of dollars, and that's, I think, really what angered Trump, because Trump loves money. I think you have to realize who we're dealing with Trump. He loves money. He loves gold. Wasn't there a guy in a James Bond movie that loves gold? Goldfinger. Yeah. So Trump loves gold, and he literally loves it. He loves the color gold. He loves money. He likes to be seen as raking in money. So I think it angered him a great deal when Iran very smoothly negotiated the passage in and out of all kinds of non-U.S. and non-Israeli, non-combatant countries, tankers and ships. So I think he admired that, and he wanted to get in on it. Of course, we know he wanted to get in on it because he said he wanted to get in on it, which is totally insane. Totally insane. Because
I respect the honesty, though. At least he was honest about it.
It's because he loves money and he sees a way to make money. He wants to jump on it. So I think Iran will probably have to give a little on their program of monetization of transit. I think they're going to have to do that. But the U.S. cannot be the big player there. It has to be done with their Gulf neighbors. It has to be done with the other port authorities in the Strait of Hormuz, right? And some of those have been combatants. They have had American bases there. So Trump may, though, I think, be able to sell that as a win on his side. Yeah, we got them so that they're not controlling the strait like they were. Another thing that Iran wants that Trump may be able to give them very easily is a withdrawal of American troops out of the Gulf state countries.
But that would, for legacy-wise and even optically, politically as well, that would be pretty disastrous.
Not for his core voter group, not for MAGA. He promised he was bringing the troops home, that we would not be the world's policemen, and that we would not be.
Yeah, so you can make the argument, say, look, we've destroyed Iran's capabilities. We don't need to be there anymore to protect the region.
Yeah.
The Gulf
He
will
can
be
sell
shooting
it.
themselves
He
now.
can sell it. He can sell it. And actually, he's going to need to sell something because he wants to increase the Pentagon's budget to 1.5 trillion, and he wants the Congress to approve a bunch of money for the cost $2 billion a day and counting that this war has been, this war that he didn't even consult Congress on, and it's a very unpopular war here in the United States. So he needs something. He needs to throw a bone to Congress, and getting rid of some of these bases, which are already unoccupiable in some cases. That would be a really good thing. So I think Trump
What happens
has
to the Gulf, though? What happens
Hmm?
to the Gulf? What is their alternative now? Is it just they have
Well,
to build a better
okay.
relationship with Iran?
I think so. And I think that was already what we were seeing. There was a rapprochement between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Oman already gets along great. Pakistan. There is nothing wrong with getting along with your neighbors. I know, unless you're Israel. And if you're Israel, you must dominate and kill them. But for the most places around the world, you need to get along with your neighbors. And nothing wrong with that. I think the trend lines were there for that. Now, what Trump won't like is the fact that a lot of these countries that we had bases in that got hit hard, we blindsided them with the war.
Yeah.
These countries are looking for a more, they're looking for new friends. They're looking for better allies so that they can have a balance against being wholly dependent on the United States, which is unreliable and aggressive. So, this will change. I mean, this is something, but Trump doesn't care about that, and American people don't care about it. So ultimately, if the U.S. has a smaller footprint in the Middle East, that is a win. That's a win. And he can say, you know what? General Clark in 2006 said we had all these countries that Israel was going to destroy and bomb and regime change. And guess what? Trump finished it. We're done. No more of that. We finished. We did everything that the 30-year Israeli program called for. If he can say that, that would allow him the ability to call it a win and be able to save a little bit in Pentagon money in theory, not in reality, but in theory, he would say we can have a smaller budget in the Middle East, and I can Congress can give me more money so we can upgrade our military forces in a new direction or whatever he's thinking about doing.
Something really interesting happened while we're speaking. A Russian bulk carrier, Abinsk, ABINSK, carrying grain from Russian-controlled Ukrainian territories docked. Okay. I thought it's sanctioned. Okay, hold on. Russian bulk carrier carrying grain from Russian-controlled Ukraine. Russian-controlled. Okay, so a Russian carrier from Russian-controlled Ukrainian territories just docked at Israel's Haifa port 2 days ago, violating US, UK, and EU sanctions. So that's Israel violating. Exactly, that's Israel docking a Russian ship that is sanctioned.
That's interesting.
Could we see a deal? Exactly. Like, Amelia, I'm like, what the fuck? Like, Israel's doing this with the US supplying it billions of dollars a year. Is that Israel's way of saying fuck you to Europe? After Europe stood against, canceled the defense agreements with Israel, and but that what about the US? What about American sanctions? And is that also a deal with Israel with Russia? Because Russia's supplying Iran, could there be a deal behind the scenes where Russia's support of Iran kind of is reduced slightly? They don't supply a certain air defense, probably S-400s that were meant to supply. So I'm just worried that Israel's done already kind of divest a bit away of the US, kind of hedge themselves a bit.
Well, if many Israelis on both sides of the aisle, the various parties that are there, do not like to be seen as dependent on the United States. That is actually a point of debate. For in the United States, we say we give them all this money and they don't do what we tell them. But for the Israeli side, they go, we're a wealthy country, we're a talented country. We don't need what the U.S. gives us, and certainly we are never going to do what the U.S. tells us to do. They have national pride, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with national pride. So it is not particularly popular to. I wouldn't think anywhere to be an American lackey, and Israelis don't consider themselves that. But because they do receive UN top cover, they receive billions and billions of dollars. We fight their wars for them. Yeah, it's a little bit like we take care of them. In their own mind, I think they feel that they are America's vanguard in the Middle East in some way. They feel that they deserve what they get, but they don't like being considered dependent on the United States. And certainly Israel, like many countries, including ours, could care less about international law or sanctions. They do what they can get away with. And so it's interesting. But I think Russia, I think Putin or somebody over there, Lavrov maybe, I don't know, offered to help with peace talks, Iran and U.S. So that would be a good sign. And of course, I think China would help a little bit. But I think China's getting angrier and angrier. I don't like that. I don't like that.
Yeah, China, you've noticed that as well. Yeah, China's their statements are getting a lot more aggressive. I was talking about one yesterday, I mentioned on the show, where they said the Chinese Defense Ministry, in part of their statement, Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz and has opened it to us, telling the US to let their ships through. But they said Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz. It's pretty commanding language, pretty aggressive language by the Chinese.
Yeah.
Pretty assertive language.
The Chinese are not, I mean, from my understanding of what you see the government say, they are careful with their language. And it is not untrue that Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz, and they still control the Strait of Hormuz. But then Trump is sitting outside in the Arabian Sea, controlling it a second time, a second set of locks, But when you see the Chinese or the Chinese official statements or statements by key Chinese leaders sounding angry, that's unusual. You don't usually see that. They're usually very diplomatic, very restrained, it seems like, very careful in the choice of their language. And again, the whole world is suffering. The longer this goes on, if you take 45 days or however many it's been of real interruption of energy, gas, oil, gas, helium, fertilizer, potash, you name it. And certainly the disruption of the financial businesses and other businesses that take place in like the UAE and Saudi Arabia and Kuwait and all these, the cost keeps adding up. And it's not like, if it goes on long enough, big businesses are going to find alternatives to do their business. And so they may not all come back to the region. So this is extremely costly. Trump's vanity, and this is in many ways, this war is about Trump's vanity. It is very costly, not just to Americans who don't want to pay $4.50 a gallon for gas. It's the whole world that is being impacted. And it's also illustrating the stupidity of most of his tariffs, because he's had to lift them and then re-threaten them. And, it's just, who would want to deal with the United States? We make things so much more complicated than they need to be.
Yeah, I agree. Karen, I'm just seeing a comment just came in by Smotrich. I'm going to read out that comment for you as we wrap up. On the eve, I hate this person so fucking much. You have no idea. So as you know, Mert is criticizing the settlements on the West Bank. Smotrich says the following: on the eve of Holocaust Remembrance Day, of course, whenever they do something wrong, go back to the Holocaust. Every freaking time. They don't understand how tired the global community is of this. On the eve of the Holocaust Remembrance Day, the German Chancellor should bow his head and apologize 1,000 times on behalf of Germany, rather than daring a preach of morality to us on how to conduct ourselves against the Nazis of our generation. Of course, let's call Palestinians Nazis, because why not? Who murdered, raped, slaughtered, and burnt women, the elderly, and children in the most horrific massacre perpetrated against the Jewish people since the terrible Holocaust. Fair. I agree with that statement. It does not justify what you're doing in the West Bank, because the West Bank did not conduct October 7th. It was Gaza. We will not accept instructions from hypocritical leaders in Europe, a continent that is once again losing its conscience and its ability to distinguish between good and evil. Mr. Chancellor, the days when Germans dictated Jews, oh my God, man, when they were permitted or forbidden to live are over and shall not return. You will not force us into ghettos again, certainly not in our land. Our return to the ghettos, our return to the land of Israel, our biblical and historical homeland, is the answer to anyone who tries to destroy us, and we do not apologize for it a single moment. I'm Israeli child. I just despise that person so much. I just hope Israelis wake up to how despicable that man is. Honestly, I'm not really going to use that language. It's just so upsetting.
It is. He has a very devilish way about him. Also, he has a very casual and the things that he says and the way he says them is if they're so innocent, and yet the words that he says are so brutal, and it's pretty bad. But yeah, I think people in Israel are also pretty sick of Ben-Gvir and Smotrich as well. They understand. In fact, I think the Israelis understand a lot more than maybe critics of Israel give them credit for. And I'm certainly a critic of Israel, so I don't give them credit. But they are smart people, and they have chosen to live in Israel. They didn't have to. They chose to live there. And of course, they live the way they live, and they beat up on everybody. They steal and run the law for their benefit. You know, they vote in things like we can kill the Palestinians in our detention simply with a judge saying that they will be killed without trial. And they will kill them. I mean, they will do that, and they will say this is good for Israel. But for all of that evil, I think that they are smart enough to realize that in the bigger picture of the world, their leadership right now, all these guys you mentioned, and Netanyahu on top of him, and others, these guys are ruining it for Israel. They are ruining everything for Israel. The whole world hates Israel. They didn't hate Israel before. Most of them couldn't care less. But now they hate them, and they hate them because of Gaza, because we watched what they did to Gaza. We are seeing what they're doing in South Lebanon. They have told the Lebanese, we are going to make it look like Gaza, meaning that they actually are quite proud of what they've done in Gaza, but the rest of the world hates them for it. So you've got that. Then you've got the fact that the United States, which is really not Israel, but we seem to work for them. That causes a lot of problems in the United States. As you can see, the younger generations despise Israel and will not, Israel's benefits from the United States and their support that they get are not going to be around in 30 years. And they probably won't be around in 20 years, because the people coming up who will be in Congress, the people that will be voting for people, the attitudes of Americans are going to be very, very different than what they were in the past 20 years. So that change is happening. Nothing you can do about it. Charlie Kirk, dead or alive, it makes no difference. The trends are happening. So this is not good for Israel as a Western-oriented country, because even if our empire collapses and fades, we are still going to be a major country in the West. So we will have our Western friends and allies. And Israel should be one of those, but they're ruining that relationship with America. They know it. You've also got...
They're losing the US. They're losing the US.
They're losing the US. And they're also, while many of their products are good that they can produce, many people now around the world are boycotting. Governments are even doing it. Is the aid that Italy gives automatically renews it no longer. She suspended the automatic renewal to aid to Israel. So that is as countries, particularly the European countries, which do give money and help Israel in many ways, as they run out of money, because of their energy crises, because of their domestic problems and all kinds of other issues, as money becomes constrained in any country, the first thing that goes is your charity. And if you have charity to Israel, when Israel's behavior has made it extremely unpopular in your country, that's an easy cut. So Israel is isolated, and it's going to be more isolated. They have a vision of being an energy center. They want Saudi oil pumped out right to the street. I mean, a big part of why they had to kill the Gazans and destroy Gaza is they want Gazan oil. The Gazans share that oil field right off of Gaza and the coast in the Mediterranean, Western Israel and Northern Gaza. There's a gas field. And of course, like all gas fields, right? It's gas, it's shared. They don't want to share it with Gaza, and they're not going to develop it if Gaza gets anything out of it. But what's a good way to solve that problem? Let's kill all the Gazans, move them out, pave it into a parking lot, and then we have all the gas for ourselves. We don't have to negotiate, share, argue, and it makes us wealthy. It gives us an ability to survive into the next century. But this desire to survive into the next century, which Israel, I'm sure, has as a state, the way they're doing it is really reducing all their choices. It's reducing their options. It's going to impoverish them. And it's also, many Israelis, they don't want to raise their kids in Israel. Why would you? I mean, when there's so many other places you could do it. And especially for Israelis, there are Israeli communities everywhere. You can be a practicing Jew or a secular Jew anywhere on the planet. You're probably not going to have a problem. This is not 1930s Germany. I don't know any place. remotely
they
resembles that.
same fucking strategy for decades. Karen, always a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for coming on and having this discussion, and would love you. I'm sure I'm going to have you again soon. The audience loves you. Thank you so much, Karen.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. We'll talk to you next time.
Thank you, Karen. All right, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the marathon today. I'm exhausted. There's days within the week where it just all hits me and my energy just drops. We had a discussion with General Ben Hodges. It was a one-off discussion. It's on the channel. And then we had Admiral Montgomery to discuss the blockade. We had a really good, if you were there, it's a really interesting military discussion that we had. Then we had Rula again, Rula Jibril this time around. Last time we had a great debate, me and her, because I agree with a lot of what she says, but obviously she's a lot deeper in that rabbit hole of greater Israel theory. I'm not that deep into it. I criticize Israeli foreign policy, but I also don't think they just want more land. Everything they do is for more land. I'm not that extreme on that side, but we're both extremely critical of the current Israeli administration and their foreign policy. So, but it was more today of a discussion of her giving her thoughts and me really trying to understand her, because I really wanted to understand where she comes from, especially, as I said before, the statements by the Israeli defense minister when it comes to southern Lebanon. Then our regular guest Trita Parsi to discuss the ceasefire, and I agree on his stance on what could happen next and where we're at. I think you should check it out if you didn't hear it. And obviously, one of your favorites, Karen, Colonel Karen, is on the show. We just finished that discussion. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you again. We've got 3 interviews, including Professor Izadi from Iran. We had a discussion with him last time. I'm looking at the calendar right now. I've got 3 already scheduled. I'm sure the team will put in 1 or 2 more. We had Professor Izadi, who's a professor in Iran at Tehran University. Last time was more me listening to him. This time I think I'll be going back and forth, challenging him. And I'm trying to get him on a debate with Jonathan Conrick, who's from the IDF. After Professor Izadi, I do have Avram Berg from Israel, former Speaker of the Knesset, one of my favorite gentlemen to speak to, one of my favorite guests. And there's afterwards, and I'm going to have an hour or 2 break for a meeting. And then I've got Alex Kreiner, who's a geopolitical analyst who's been on the show before. These are the 3 booked for tomorrow. And then lastly, on Thursday is a killer day. We got Ray McGovern and we got Dr. Maloney, but also got Pepe Escobar, a regular, Colonel McGregor, a regular, and Robert Pape to talk about where the war is at right now. He's the professor that studied regime changes for over 100 years, and he's been very vocal about the Iran war. Thank you so much, everyone. I'll see you tomorrow, unless something urgent happens tonight. Bye-bye.